Chapter 692. As the only force that could represent the power of Zhongzhou state in Tiannan, Emperor Dong's palace's speed of development was enough to stun most people. No matter how powerful the Tiannan Freedom Corps was or how deep its connection with Zhongzhou state was, at least nominally, they were rebels, wandering ghosts in Tiannan, and had nothing to do with Zhongzhou state. The arrival of Emperor Dong's palace was equivalent to secretly building a stable bridge between the Tiannan Freedom Corps and the Zhongzhou state. The armaments, food, and all supplies that the Tiannan Freedom Corps needed were taken over by Emperor Dong's palace. They were transported to the Freedom Corps in large quantities from Zhongzhou state, and then Emperor Dong's palace bought back a large number of arms from the Freedom Corps. This seemed superfluous, but it was the most important fig leaf. At least it could prove that the Freedom Corps had nothing to do with Zhongzhou state. The Freedom Corps and Emperor Dong's palace were getting closer and closer. This could only be regarded as the development plan of Emperor Dong's palace. Zhongzhou state could completely let it go, and at the same time, no one could say anything. After all, it had been 3 years since Tiannan state broke away from Annan state. At least on the surface, Zhongzhou state did not interfere with Annan state's right to take back Tiannan state. It was just that the rebels in Tiannan state could not do it themselves. Nowadays, Annan gradually had a concept of no owner. It did not belong to Zhongzhou state, but in fact, it did not belong to Annan state. Emperor Dong's palace did not need Annan state's consent to develop here. What Emperor Dong needed to do most was how to quickly establish a foothold here. In other words, how to quickly get the recognition of the local forces. The Freedom Corps could be said to be one of the biggest forces in Tiannan. In this way, it was completely reasonable for Emperor Dong's palace to cooperate with the Freedom Corps. The establishment of an alliance between the two did not mean that Zhongzhou state and the Freedom Corps had established an alliance. So now, strictly speaking, Zhongzhou state only needed to be responsible for Emperor Dong's palace, and it still had nothing to do with the Freedom Corps. In fact, when Emperor Dong's palace marched into Tiannan, Zhongzhou state had already issued a statement that Zhongzhou state had no territorial ambitions in Tiannan and would not give any form of support to the Freedom Corps. Emperor Dong's palace marched into Tiannan only because Tiannan was in line with the development direction of Emperor Dong's palace. Such a statement suppressed the backlash of public opinion in Annan state, and the strategic alliance between Emperor Dong and the Freedom Corps had been quickly established. This meant that Emperor Dong's palace had entered the fast lane at the beginning of its development. With the full support of the Freedom Corps, the only thing Emperor Dong needed to do was to expand its strength and influence. The Emperor Dong's palace now had a total of 1,530 people, most of whom were graduates of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. They were also the most elite combatants of the Emperor Dong's palace. When there was no special task, the headquarters of the Emperor Dong's palace basically had more than 1,000 combatants stationed there. With such strength, the Emperor Dong's palace could help the Freedom Corps. If they fought head-on, they would not be afraid of anyone in Tiannan. Sufficient strength drove the development of Emperor Dong's palace, and it was constantly improving its headquarters. If everything went well with the development of Emperor Dong's palace, it was destined to become the most prosperous place in Tiannan in the future. Therefore, when Emperor Dong's palace first entered Tiannan, the higher-ups of Emperor Dong's palace proposed an ambitious plan after negotiating with the Freedom Corps. New City Plan. With the current temporary headquarters of Emperor East's palace as the center, Emperor East's palace drew an area on the map of Tunnan City, which almost included half of the circle of Tunnan City. This area was even more exaggerated than the entire Mount Dibing, and this area was the future headquarters of Emperor East's palace. A headquarters that covered more than half of the city. The new city plan could be said to be a huge plan that ran through the whole development process of Emperor Dong's palace. It was expected to take nearly 30 years. If there was no accident, this time would also be the time when Emperor Dong's palace started to reach its peak. The first phase of the new city plan was migration. Emperor Dong's palace would build a new city on the basis of Tunnan City, covering more than half of the city. As the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace, the future blueprint of the new city was enough to accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. The families of the elites who joined Emperor Dong's palace would migrate with the stability of the new city, forming the core interest chain of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. This was the foundation for the emergence of powerful families. Emperor Dong's palace would also use this interest chain to completely stabilize the order of the new city and then radiate to the whole Tiannan. In the end, the land of nearly 40,000 square kilometers in Tiannan would become the second Beihai province. The new city plan was an extremely huge and complicated plan, but it was not an unfounded fantasy. Every step of the plan was clear and clear. Countless problems that might be encountered in the plan had basic solutions. As a whole, it looked magnificent and highly feasible. Every detail had more than one set of perfect plans, as well as the response plans to various possible emergencies. When this extremely detailed and huge plan was sent to the Freedom Corps and the Zhongzhou State Parliament, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State who saw the plan felt amazed and complicated. At present, Emperor Dong's palace only gathered a group of young people. Perhaps it had the idea of the new city plan, but the new city plan was no longer an idea. It was a real comprehensive plan with reasons and evidence. Whether it was Li Beidian or Ning Qianxing, or Lin Yuxian who might join Emperor Dong's palace, or even Li Tianlan himself, none of them could prepare this plan so perfectly. This wasn't a matter of ability, but experience, or rather, a matter of cognition. The new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace was an attempt to copy the success of the Wang family of Beihai. It was not the current Wang family of Beihai. What they wanted to replicate was the Wang family of Beihai hundreds of years ago. For today's Zhongzhou state, the Wang family of Beihai hundreds of years ago was already a very strange impression. Only the core members of the Wang family of Beihai knew what their families had experienced in the early days, what problems they had encountered, and how they had dealt with them. And these cognition had now become the new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace. Wang Yuetong. It could only be Wang Yuetong who proposed the new city plan. She not only proposed the plan, but even started to act before Zhongzhou State gave a clear answer. This extremely long plan had been carried out step by step under her command. Perhaps the new city plan would make many changes in the future and break through the path of the rise of the Wang family of Beihai. But at the very beginning, this plan, which was destined to affect Emperor Dong's palace, had been put on the right track by Wang Yuetong. This was the most important gift she left to Li Tianlan. It could only be left, not given. Because Wang Yuetong would not come back. In the thick night, Du Hanyin quietly read through the whole new city plan and sighed softly. When all the higher-ups of Emperor Dong's palace returned to Lin, she could only stay in the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. She had been with Li Tianlan for more than 3 years, but strictly speaking, she was not a member of Emperor Dong's palace because she joined Sai City more than 3 years ago. Now, although Sai City and Emperor Dong's palace were on the same side, there were still some differences in their identities. For example, when Li Honghe died, Situ Zhangyue was sent to Sai City, while Du Hanyin could stay in the temporary headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. Now Du Hanyin had officially broken through to the thunder-shocking realm. Her wind vein, which had been destroyed, had completely matured after the mutation. In terms of strength, she was one of the real main forces in both Sai City and Emperor Dong's palace. Li Beidian, Ning Qianxing, and the others went to Lin, and handed Emperor Dong's palace to her. Everyone was relieved. Du Hanyin studied the new city plan until midnight. She poured herself a glass of water and was about to rest when there was a knock on the door. "Sister Du, are you asleep?" An anxious voice sounded from outside the door. Frowning slightly, Du Hanyin walked over to open the door and was stunned. There were 5 or 6 people standing outside the door with anxious expressions. "What happened?" Du Hanyin asked directly. She knew all the people in front of her. All 5 of them were graduates of the Sky Academy. After being brought back to Tiannan by Wang Yuetong, the 5 people in front of her should be a team in charge of intelligence, but Du Hanyin couldn't remember what kind of intelligence the team was in charge of. Bronze Tiger City is on the move. Among the 5 people, Yu, the team leader, said quickly, "Sister Du, we just got the news that there are signs of large-scale mobilization of the rebel army in Bronze Tiger City, with at least tens of thousands of people." Du Hanyin's face changed, and her hair seemed to stand on end. "How many people?" The specific number is not clear, but a conservative estimate is that at least 50,000 to 60,000 rebels in Bronze Tiger City have received orders to fight, and the number is still increasing. Du Hanyin took a deep breath and murmured, "What on earth are they going to do?" Bronze Tiger City was at the southern end of Tiannan, and it was also one of the two cities controlled by the real rebels. If Tiannan was a battlefield, Bronze Tiger City and Tunan City were the front lines. There were no more than 80,000 rebels stationed in Bronze Tiger City. Now it seemed that the other side was going to mobilize the left and right armies. Were they crazy? Figure out their direction of battle. Du Hanyin forced herself to calm down. The phone rang hurriedly. He picked up the phone and said hello. Then his face changed dramatically. "Sister Du, the rebels of Bronze Tiger have left the city, and their target is the northwest." His voice was grave, and his face was a little pale. The northwest. Standing in the direction of Bronze Tiger City and looking northwest, it was Tunan City. If the rebels wanted to attack the Purgatory of Heaven capital or the Freedom Forces, it was impossible for them to set off in this direction, because it meant that they had to take a detour of at least 100 kilometers. The rebels of Bronze Tiger were heading straight for Tunan City. Du Hanyin took out her mobile phone and dialed at once. She had to tell Li Beidian, the Freedom Corps, and even the Parliament of Zhongzhou State about this as soon as possible. The rebels of Tiannan turned out in full force, and tens of thousands of people headed straight for Tunan. This meant a real war. Du Hanyin dialed a string of numbers. But the phone rang with a cold electronic beep during the short wait. Unable to get through. Du Hanyin froze for a moment and looked down at the screen subconsciously. The communication was automatically hung up. On the glowing phone screen, the upper right corner, which represented the phone signal, was completely blank. No signal. No signal. Du Hanyin's heart suddenly sank, and a chill spread all over her body in an instant. Without any hesitation, she suddenly looked up and said, "Give the order, get ready, boom." The violent gunfire drowned out her voice in an instant. The violent explosion resounded through the temporary headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace with flames all over the sky. In the distant night, someone seemed to be roaring with all his might, with unparalleled violence and madness. "Burning core! Charge!" The night sky was completely lit up in an instant. The flaming cannonballs filled the air, roared from all directions, and landed in the temporary headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. Explosions! Explosions were everywhere. The earth shook and the mountains shook. Countless elites of Emperor Dong's palace rushed out of the house at once. Du Hanyin also rushed over. The flames of the explosions all over the sky shone on her pale face. In the distance, the dense crowd roared wildly and covered over like a huge wave. It was as fast as lightning. It was enough to conquer everything. Du Hanyin directly sounded the alarm of the headquarters. The dazzling red light kept flashing in the headquarters. In the endless gunfire, Du Hanyin's screams suddenly rang through the night sky. "Enemy attack! Get ready to fight!" The figures gathered quickly in the gunfire. The violent killing intent and fighting intent gathered wildly. The overwhelming gunfire and the tide-like enemy did not make the people of East Emperor Palace feel any fear. Instead, their fighting intent soared. Emperor Dong's palace had been established for a short time. They might not have much sense of belonging here, but they were all graduates of the top Special Warfare Academy in Zhongzhou State. In a way, they were all geniuses, or at least talents. Everyone was proud and arrogant. In the face of the sudden enemy attack, everyone even felt a little ridiculous. The gunfire roared. Under the night sky, the enemy charged quickly and covered the mountains and plains. But no one felt that it was a big threat. There seemed to be a lot of enemies under the night sky, but not enough to make people desperate. 3,000? 5,000? 6,000? But it was only 5,000 or 6,000 people. At this time, there were thousands of people in East Emperor Palace, and none of them was lower than the ice-condensing realm. They were elites, real elites. A few thousand people came to raid East Emperor Palace. At the front of the crowd, someone even laughed out loud. One by one, the phalanxes gathered in the gunfire. Everyone was looking at Du Hanyin. Du Hanyin looked at the restless night sky in the distance. The roaring footsteps approached quickly in the night sky. 1,000 meters. 800 meters. 500 meters. 300 meters. Du Hanin suddenly raised her palm. The dazzling lightning suddenly lit up as she raised her hand. Her order was resolute. Kill. In any case, this was the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. And Emperor Dong's palace did not have the habit of fleeing without fighting. The enemy was just a few thousand people. That was what everyone thought. Kill. In the soaring roar, all the phalanxes in Emperor Dong's palace gathered in one place and rushed directly toward the enemy. Gunfire, bullets, and bombs. The chaotic roar broke out at the moment when the two groups of people collided. The fire of war was raging. Blood flowed like a river. There was no stalemate. The moment the two sides touched, the enemy in the front row was directly torn apart by the elites of Emperor Dong's palace. The enemy in the rear rushed up without hesitation, stepping on the bodies of their companions. Charge! Charge! 2 minutes. The elite formation of Emperor Dong's palace was completely torn apart. Indifferent, powerful, and crazy. The comprehensive strength of the enemy of thousands of people was not stronger than that of Emperor Dong's palace, but their will, which had been honed in the fire of war, was comparable to gold and iron. The exuberant fighting desire made them rush forward without any hesitation, stepping on the blood, bones, and the bodies of their companions. This was a real tiger. This was a real army. The top army. Without any suspense, the formation of Emperor Dong's palace was torn apart. 5 minutes. The formation of Emperor Dong's palace was completely scattered. The flashing lightning, the burning fire, and the spreading ice. The aura of death continued to spread, but it was forcibly suppressed by the charge of the burning legion. 10 minutes. Du Hanin was seriously injured. Under the incredibly powerful offensive, Emperor Dong's palace suffered heavy casualties and began to retreat. 15 minutes. The incomparably violent vanguard completely suppressed all the spirit of Emperor Dong's palace. The killing continued. From beginning to end, the burning legion had only one order. Charge! Charge! No one retreated. Everyone was moving forward. Even if they died, everyone would die on the way forward. 20 minutes. The temporary headquarters built by Emperor Dong's palace for several months was completely razed to the ground. The Emperor Dong's palace suffered heavy casualties and was completely destroyed. 25 minutes. The burning legion began to change direction after destroying Emperor Dong's palace. All troops marched to the Freedom Corps base in Tunan City. It was grand and vigorous, and its momentum was like thunder. All the rebels in Bronze Tiger City began to move. But the real war was completely dominated by the burning legion and the army of Annan State. When everyone's attention was attracted by the rebels in Bronze Tiger City, 50,000 troops of Annan State directly bypassed the mountains from the east of Tiannan and went straight to Tunan. 3 years of fighting and fooling around. Tiannan, which was generally peaceful, was instantly covered by the flames of war. Without warning, endless elites of the Burning Legion entered Tiannan from the west and went straight to Tunan City. The 80th minute of the war. The first army of the Burning Legion approached the war zone of Tunan Freedom Corps after destroying Emperor Dong's palace. 1 hour later, the first base of Tunan Freedom Corps was destroyed. The flames of war spread wildly and burned fiercely. The 3rd hour of the war. The 2nd Legion of the Freedom Corps was destroyed. The Freedom Corps stationed in the 2nd Legion. A total of 5,000 people were completely annihilated. No one fled the battlefield. The war strangled the lives of both sides in the cruelest way. The 2nd base of the Freedom Corps. This was the base with the least number of people in the Freedom Corps. Only 5,000 people. But these 5,000 people were all Thunderbolt Battalion. This was the Thunderbolt Battalion that Dongqing Wudi had traded with the Wang family of Beihai. It was also the Thunderbolt Battalion that fought all the way from Im to Reki City and pierced through the armies of 3 countries in the chaos of Eastern Europe. The 5,000th Thunderbolt Battalion was wiped out. The Burning Legion, which had also paid a heavy price, gathered the subsequent forces and went straight to the 3rd base of the Freedom Corps and successfully joined the main force of Annan State. The Burning Legion burned the night. Before dawn, the third base of the Freedom Corps fell. The Burning Legion officially took over Tunan City. Not only the Freedom Corps, even Xianxia State was dumbfounded. This was the first battle of the Burning Legion after leaving Africa. The whole world realized the power of the Burning Legion. Like a divine sword that had been hidden for many years, it was unsheathed in an instant. The shocking sharpness directly tore apart the situation that had been in a stalemate in Tianan for more than 3 years. It was invincible and invincible. Both the Freedom Corps and Emperor Dong's palace became sacrifices under the sword of the Burning Legion and suffered heavy casualties. This night in Tianan. This night in the Burning Legion. In an instant, it became the focus of the world's attention. Chapter 693. While everyone's attention was focused on the war in Tianan, torrential rain had already gathered in Yuzhou. The violent raindrops fell to the ground accompanied by the roar of thunder. The wind howled, and the rain-soaked leaves danced in the air. Pale lightning flickered in the sky above Yuzhou. A shabby bus was temporarily parked on the side of the road due to the heavy rain. The bus was full of people, and everyone was sitting quietly in their seats, waiting. The wind blew through the windows, and the dense raindrops fell with a pitter-patter. The bus was as quiet as a tomb. No one moved and no one spoke. The faint light illuminated the front of the bus. In the front passenger seat, a black man's face was reflected in the light of a tablet computer. An exquisite map was changing on the computer screen. The black man lowered his head and looked at the computer quietly. His thick fingers moved slightly on the screen, and three-dimensional images appeared on the computer screen, incomparably clear. The black man narrowed his eyes and looked at the images on the computer screen in silence. Time gradually passed, and the atmosphere in the silent bus gradually became restless. Only the black man in the front passenger seat remained patient, quietly looking at the images on the computer screen. "General." A muffled voice like thunder suddenly broke the silence. This voice was very loud, and even though it had been deliberately lowered, it still gave off a resonant feeling. He was obviously not used to the feeling of hiding like a mouse waiting for an opportunity, so he said in a low, muffled voice with undisguised impatience, "It's been an hour." The one who spoke was the driver in the driver's seat. This was also a black man, one whose body could truly be described as majestic. He sat in the driver's seat, and his entire body almost filled up the entire driver's seat. This was not because he was fat, but because he had an almost incomprehensible kind of burly power. The darkness completely covered his dark skin and face, and only a pair of bright eyes shone fiercely in the dark night. At first glance, the driver's seat, which was almost completely occupied, looked like an incredibly strong chimpanzee. Her voice was hoarse and sonorous, but if one listened carefully, there was still a trace of a woman's voice. This driver who looked like a chimpanzee was actually a black woman. "Don't be anxious." The black man in the front passenger's seat shook his head. "Radel, we need to wait for our men to fully understand the situation before we act. You should learn from your brother, our great commander. You're still too impatient." "I hate waiting." The gorilla-like woman shook her head in annoyance. "Fighting is what I like. Perhaps I should stay in Tianan. That way, I might be able to kill a few Freedom Corps generals for fun. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page." Radel. She was the captain of the guards of the Burning Legion in Africa. She was also Ramiro's sister and the strongest woman in the Burning Legion. Her strength barely reached the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but her unreasonable fighting style made her actual combat capability close to that of the half-step invincible realm. If she was in Tianan tonight, the attack of the Burning Legion would definitely be fiercer. "But you're in Yuzhou now." The black man in the passenger's seat shook his head. "Behave yourself, Radel. We are now in the capital of the most powerful country in the world. Any unnecessary actions could bring us trouble." Radel let out a cold snort like a muffled thunder, but he did not say anything else. The black man shook his head, looked out of the window, and said nothing. His name was Schiller, the deputy commander of the Burning Legion and the only deputy commander. He was the real second-in-command and the undisputed #2 expert in the Burning Legion, a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. When the Burning Legion swept everything in Tiananmen, Schiller was in charge of the operation in Yuzhou. He did not know which was more important, Tiananmen or Yuzhou, but he would not allow himself to fail, even if tonight's operation was not glorious in his eyes. His gaze passed through the wind and rain and fell on a hazy light in the distance. Less than 2 blocks away from here was the private hospital of the giant group of Xianxia State in Yuzhou. That was also his target tonight. The tablet in his hands suddenly vibrated. Schiller's palm shook slightly, and he picked up the call immediately. A soft but firm voice sounded on the tablet. "General, the target has been confirmed." Schiller's spirit gathered instantly. He said in a deep voice, "Report the target's location." Target number 1, Ward 3, 9th floor of the inpatient department. Target number 2, Ward 5, 9th floor of the inpatient department. Target number 3, Ward 6, 4th floor of the second building of the inpatient department. The targets were reported in detail one by one. Number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7. Schiller's eyes became brighter and brighter. His eyes were like 2 burning wildfires. Special information, Bai Qingqian is currently in target number 1. She hasn't left. Schiller's eyes narrowed. Bai Qingqian, the daughter-in-law of the Dongqing clan of the giant group, the eldest daughter of the Bai family. Now she was the speaker of Liaodong State of Zhongzhou State, one of the few people standing at the core of power in Zhongzhou State, and also the most likely candidate to become a member of parliament in the next session. Schiller laughed and said slowly, "She is very influential, isn't she?" The person on the other end of the communication didn't speak, as if he was thinking about the meaning of this sentence. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." "Kill her," Schiller said calmly. "Kill the same target together." Kill together? The elite of the Burning Legion who was responsible for the investigation on the other end of the communication repeated in surprise. Schiller responded calmly and chuckled. "It can't be worse. It's just a speaker, isn't it?" The elite of the Burning Legion on the other side didn't dare to speak for a while. A speaker? Just. Since the founding of Zhongzhou State, no one seemed to have heard such a sentence. In the vast Zhongzhou State, with a land of tens of millions of square kilometers, there were less than 40 speakers, and several of them were also members of parliament. They were the real border governor of Zhongzhou State, the figures standing at the top. Just. The abnormal death of any speaker would be a storm that could sweep the whole situation for Zhongzhou State, and the murderer would be endlessly hunted by Zhongzhou State. But when he thought of their target tonight, all right, just. The elite of the Burning Legion muttered and repeated, "Confirm the target's location again. The location is correct, you can act. Repeat, the target is correct, you can act." Schiller's eyes narrowed tightly. He looked at the hospital in the distance, which was the source of all the storms. Dongqing Rushi lived in this hospital now. Li Shi lived in it. Tribulation, who had just moved from Liaodong to Yuzhou, lived in it. Gong Sun Qi, general of Azure Dragon, lived in it. Yi, general of Vermilion Bird, lived in it. Li Wangxing, lieutenant general of Spirit Tortoise, lived in it. Several important officers of the Snowdance Corps lived in it. Countless important figures. The people who might play an important role in Zhongzhou State countless days later were on their attack list at this time. Compared with these people, Bai Qingqian might not be the only one, but she was not the most important. Schiller smiled, a little crazy. It was different from the mysterious commission they received. His target tonight was these famous figures in Zhongzhou State. All of them. No one could be missing. This might not be what the employer behind them wanted. But this was what the Burning Legion wanted. He took a deep breath and looked back at the crowd in the bus. In the silence, countless people in the bus focused their attention. Their eyes were shining, like a group of hungry wolves in the dark. Schiller nodded with satisfaction and said in a deep voice, "Move." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 694. There was no doubt that the private hospital of the giant group in Yuzhou had now become one of the most important places in Yuzhou, and it was also one of the most important places in the hearts of everyone in the giant group. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, Almost all the important wounded who followed Li Tianlan were gathered here. They had broken through the tribulation of the peak of the invincible realm. 3 of the 4 spirits of Zhongzhou state. Dongqing Rushi. Some important officers of the Snowdance Corps. Some experts of the Shadow Sect, Mount Shu, and Jade Pool. There were also some elites who might not be famous but could play an important role in their respective systems. As these people gathered, the atmosphere in the hospital became subtle. The giant group had strengthened the security here before these people entered the hospital. The Shadow Sect, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, and Sai City had also left experts here to help the giant group protect the safety here. Dongqing Wudi even personally ordered a special unit of the Central Theater of Operations to be stationed here. The private hospital was not large, but at this time, there were nearly 2,000 guards. No matter where they were, they could be said to be elite guards. There were also several thundershocking realm experts. In terms of defense, it could be said that it had reached the limit. In the hospital these days, even the ordinary guards who patrolled daily had the strength of the special forces of the theater of operations at the very least. The bus moved forward slowly in the heavy rain. Schiller, the only deputy commander of the Burning Legion, slowly put down the tablet in his hand and stood up. Everyone. His clear and steady voice spread throughout the bus immediately. According to the information we got, the internal defense force of the hospital is very strong. They have dozens of times more people than us, and they are all elites. The Burning Legion has never been afraid of powerful enemies, but I have to say that our opponents tonight are not very easy to deal with. And in fact, our purpose for tonight's action is not war. This is a surprise attack, so all the actions tonight should focus on clearing our targets. Don't get entangled with other unnecessary enemies. We have to kill the most important targets as quickly as possible in the greatest chaos, and then retreat. I repeat, this is a surprise attack, not a war. Not a war. This is an order, understand? Understood. The loud and clear voice swept through the whole bus and directly spread into the rain outside the bus. Schiller nodded. At this point he didn't care what noise he made. The bus kept accelerating in the hands of the black woman who looked like a gorilla. Schiller glanced down at his watch and said expressionlessly, "The operation time is 20 minutes. Regardless of victory or defeat, we must retreat after 20 minutes. Good luck, everyone." Buzz. The roar of an engine suddenly sounded. The specially modified engine continued to roar, creating a deafening noise on the long street under the heavy rain. The bus suddenly began to accelerate, and the flashing headlights cut through the curtain of rain. Radel laughed maniacally as he gripped the steering wheel and headed straight for the hospital entrance. 200 meters. 100 meters. 50 meters. The distance of several hundred meters was rapidly shortened. The rainwater on both sides of the street splashed out continuously as the bus charged forward. At the gate of the hospital, a team of elites on duty finally reacted. All the members of the team took out their weapons at the same time and rushed out of the duty room. In the chaotic storm, they raised their guns and aimed in the direction of the bus. Bang! The dull and intimidating gunshots echoed in the rainy night. The elite on duty was just about to shoot when his head suddenly exploded. In the splashing blood, his body fell backward, and the shot that was originally aimed forward was fired into the night sky. Sniper! The other members of the team on duty changed their positions instinctively the moment the gunshot sounded. They had already picked up the walkie-talkie and roared, "Enemy attack!" Boom! The earth-shattering sound completely interrupted the captain's roar. Explosion! Explosions sounded from all directions at the same time. Under the heavy rain, billowing smoke and raging fire rose in an instant. Walls, roads, trees, gardens. Explosions were happening in countless corners. Even the 2 most heavily guarded inpatient buildings were stuffed with a small number of bombs. Fire and smoke spread in the hospital. In just a few seconds, the 2 inpatient buildings were on fire. The elites guarding the hospital began to evacuate the important people immediately. By Qingqian, Dongqing Rushi, Tribulation, and some old cadres in the sanatorium were the first batch of people to be transferred. It was a transfer, not an escape. It was undoubtedly the stupidest thing to leave the hospital without knowing how many people the enemy had and what kind of firepower they had. But the inpatient department was on fire. At the very least, the most important people had to leave the inpatient department as soon as possible. The fire was burning in the heavy rain. The dazzling lights suddenly lit up. The blazing white light shone in every corner of the hospital. At the same time, the bus, which had accelerated to the limit, directly crashed into the hospital at a speed of nearly 200 kilometers per hour. The explosions were still going on. The railings at the main entrance of the hospital and the duty room were completely smashed. The front of the bus had already been completely deformed. Like a mad bull, the bus crushed everything and rushed straight to the inpatient department. The overwhelming attacks seemed to have found the target in the shortest time, and the hail of bullets completely enveloped the bus in an instant. Kill! In the bus, an excited and violent roar suddenly rang out. The blazing white light all over the hospital suddenly lit up a large area of faint blue. The bus was completely blown up by the faint blue lightning. Radel, who was broad and burly like a chimpanzee, jumped out of the lightning and rushed to the inpatient department with a roar. The nearest elite team of guards rushed over without hesitation. Gunshots rang out, and a sharp layer of ice appeared in the hands of the team leader behind him. Radel laughed maniacally as she opened her arms and hugged the first 3 members who rushed over. She was clearly a woman, but it was completely easy for her to open her arms and envelop the 3 male elites. The bullets turned into sparks in the lightning, and Radel's arms that were hugging her opponents suddenly tightened. Crack! Amidst the crisp sound of bones shattering, the bodies of the 3 Special Forces elites directly collided with each other. Blood sprayed out from their bodies. In just an instant, all the bones and even the internal organs of the 3 people were completely smashed. The lightning did not stop. It was vast and mighty, engulfing the rest of the team, and then it went straight forward. In the world's most powerful country. In the capital of the most powerful country. The Burning Legion's actions could be said to be an unprecedented attack. The security here was indeed very strong. But the Burning Legion's lineup this time was also very magnificent. When Ramelin, the commander of the Burning Legion, transferred the most powerful elites of the Burning Legion to Tiannan, more than 80% of the experts of the Burning Legion were all gathered in Yuzhou. They were in the bus. The dazzling lightning concealed the number of attackers. In less than a minute, facing countless attacks, the faint blue had already rushed hundreds of meters away. Scatter! Radel was still moving forward. Amidst the crowd concealed by the lightning, one figure after another rushed in different directions as they approached the inpatient department. One after another, streaks of lightning separated from the thunderbolts. Every flash of lightning represented a thunder-shocking realm expert. In the blink of an eye, more than 15 lightnings separated from the lightning. Nearly 20 thunder-shocking realm experts. This was definitely a number that exceeded everyone's expectations. It also represented the absolute madness of the Burning Legion. Chapter 695. What would it look like when nearly 20 thunder-shocking realm experts of the same camp charged together? Endless lightning covered every corner of the hospital in the blink of an eye. It was raining cats and dogs. The lightning spread in the rain, and the whole world seemed to be dyed blue. The majestic lightning went straight into the sky and seemed to have merged with the lightning. Thunder-shocking realm experts formed groups, and wherever they passed, there was only scorched earth. Even though the people stationed in the hospital were all elites, most of them had never seen such a scene. Absolute madness often meant absolute destructive power. Nearly 20 thunder-shocking realm experts joined forces for a short while and then rushed in different directions without any pause or hesitation. After determining the target location, the experts of the Burning Legion swept the whole battlefield in an instant like a hurricane. 3 minutes. Thousands of elites who had gathered from different directions were instantly defeated. The powerful destructive force rampaged. Thunder-shocking realm experts gathered again in 2 groups and quickly approached the most important targets of their trip, the 2 inpatient buildings of the hospital. The shrill alarm rang through the night sky. A large number of elites rushed out of the inpatient buildings. The flames lit up the night. The swaying flames continued to spread in the inpatient buildings and had burned up to the 4th floor. At this moment, the fierce gunfire completely suppressed the rainstorm and thunder and became the only melody in the night. It was a hail of bullets. Raidel's excited and shrill roar became extremely ear-piercing amidst the dense gunfire. Flashes of lightning bloomed on her burly body, and the blazing electric fire exploded the moment it came into contact with the bullets. The powerful impact caused her body to tremble slightly. Her roar grew louder, and her movements became faster and faster. She was like a wild boar, charging into the crowd under the rain of bullets. In the dull, loud noise, dozens of elites in a tight formation were directly smashed apart. Several thunder-shocking realm experts behind Rattle attacked at the same time. The lightning connected and turned into a surging blood mist in the night. Many elites fell to the ground. Rattle, who was responsible for the main attack on the number 1 inpatient building, had directly rushed into the door of the building. "Kill them!" Gerald roared and pointed to the stairs. Several bolts of lightning shot out at the same time. Ding! In the clear sound, the elevator that quickly descended to the 1st floor opened. Heavily armed elites almost filled the elevator. The moment they saw Rattle, the soldiers in the elevator raised their guns almost at the same time and opened fire. Gunfire roared. Raidel's expression was hideous and twisted. She howled and tore off her shirt. This was a woman who had completely given up on her image. Her shirt was shredded in her hands, revealing her glossy black skin that shimmered in the dark night. Under the dim light, crisscrossing scars covered her body. Her twin basketball-like breasts hung down to her belly, and her muscles tensed up. He looked like a mountain of flesh standing in the darkness. Church. With a crazy and barbaric howl, Rattle, who weighed at least 150 kilograms, charged forward in a straight line. At that moment, she was like a fearless tank, rampaging and crushing everything in her path. The whole building seemed to shake with his footsteps, and the originally clean ceiling was covered in dust. In the blink of an eye, she was already close to the elevator. "Close the door!" A shocked and angry voice suddenly sounded in the elevator. This was a completely instinctive reaction. The elite closest to the elevator door had already pressed the close button. The alloy door of the elevator slowly closed. The tank-like Rattle charged forward. She did not attempt to pry open the elevator door with her thick, dark arms. Instead, she hugged the door and slammed into the slowly closing elevator door with an aura of indifference. Boom! With a deafening roar, the elevator door that was not fully closed was bent. The thick alloy was completely deformed, and the huge impact completely destroyed all the functions of the elevator. The heavily deformed elevator was almost squashed into the wall. Blood spurted out from the cracks of the elevator and covered Rattle from head to toe. More than a dozen elites in the elevator were directly smashed into meat paste by Rattle's charge. Rattle laughed loudly, turned around, and rushed in the direction of the stairs. "You're courting death!" A furious voice suddenly rang out behind him. The darkness in the hall seemed to have been completely dispelled in an instant. The rays of light shone down. The chill was bone-piercing, dense, and sharp. The surging sword light illuminated the darkness as it pierced towards Rattle's back. Rattle, who was about to step on the stairs, suddenly turned around. Her face was covered in blood, and she looked as ferocious as a ghost. The bright sword light, accompanied by a frenzied sword energy, did not stop at all. It stabbed forward with an indomitable will. Rattle's eyes were completely focused. Instead of retreating, she moved forward and pounced on the sword light with open hands. She and the sword collided. A sudden clap of thunder rang out in the chaotic hall. A large swath of sword light bloomed from Rattle. Her huge body was sent flying nearly a dozen meters away, and she slammed hard into the wall. Boom! The entire building shook. The explosion at the beginning and the high-intensity battle seemed to have overwhelmed the sturdy building, and it gradually tilted. "Get out!" The cold sword energy was restrained for a moment, and then it surged again. "How dare you behave atrociously in Yuzhou? You all deserve to die." Bang! With a dull sound, Rattle walked out of the wall. She wiped the blood off her face and tilted her head. Her voice was hoarse, and she spoke in broken Chinese. Shu Mountain? Shu Mountain Elder Han Jinwu. There was a sharp sound in the sword light, and an ethereal voice rang out. Han Jinwu. In Zhongzhou State, this was not an ordinary name. Han Jinwu was not an ordinary elder of Shu Mountain either. He might not be famous, but he would not be ignored by anyone. He was one of the few experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in Shu Mountain. 10 years ago, he had competed with Wei Kunlun, the Nirvana Sword Master of Shu Mountain, for the Nirvana Sword. Today, he definitely had a place in the martial arts pyramid of Zhongzhou State. Radel shook her head and said something. Her Chinese was very poor, and she said it in an African dialect. Han Jinwu did not understand, but he could clearly feel the disdain in her tone. The sword light, which had been condensed to the extreme, suddenly shrank for a moment. The next second, thunderbolts with sword energy burst out of his hands. Radel screamed and bent down. She dived. At this moment, she seemed to have really turned into a chimpanzee. Tiny thunderbolts shone on her dark skin, and her speed was raised to the limit. The whole building shook violently under her feet. The sword light with thunderbolts surged. Radel's body rushed into the sword light. Blood splattered. Beads of blood flew out of her huge body. Radel ignored them and rushed to Han Jinwu's side, against the endless sword energy. Han Jinwu frowned and abruptly took a step back. Radel had already opened her hands. Boom! A violent power with a strong blue electric light burst forth. This power was so thick and dense that it caused Han Jinwu's entire body to freeze for a moment. This was a domain. Radel had not reached the invincible realm, but he already had his own pseudo-domain. Han Jinwu's face changed. He shook his long sword. The moment he used all his strength, Radel, covered in blood, rushed to his side and held him in his arms. Han Jinwu's face was instantly covered in disgusting grease. Crack! Radel roared as he unleashed all of his strength onto Han Jinwu. With a clear cracking sound, Han Jinwu's spine was completely shattered and the long sword fell from his hand. Radel grinned maliciously as he lowered his head, opened his bloody mouth, and bit down on Han Jinwu's neck. Desperate screams rang out for a moment and then disappeared. Radel had bitten off half of Han Jinwu's neck and swallowed a large mouthful of flesh. She threw Han Jinwu's body to the ground and looked at his desperate eyes. She smiled. Fresh blood stuck to her teeth. It was terrifying and hideous. My name is Radel. She was not used to speaking in Chinese. She looked at Han Jinwu's slowly dying body. My code name is King Kong. Chapter 696. The 9th minute. The violent and fierce gunshots in the hospital had become sparse compared with the beginning. This meant that the resistance in the hospital was rapidly decreasing. After the initial surprise attack, the hospital's elites, who were caught unprepared, stopped the counterattack in the shortest time possible. The fierce and determined counterattack was like a wildfire, rising rapidly in a few minutes, but it was immediately extinguished by the huge surprise attack. The gunshots were getting smaller and smaller. The heavy casualties also meant that the guards in the hospital were getting fewer and fewer. The fire in the hospital was still burning. In Dongcheng Rushi's ward on the 9th floor, Bai Qingqian stood by the window, looking at the number 2 inpatient building opposite. Her calm and beautiful face was full of indifference. The number 2 building had obviously tilted. The faint blue light went all the way up, and there were large cracks on the thick and solid building. The windows of the ward were all broken. The dazzling lightning was reflected in her eyes, which looked extremely sad. The number 1 inpatient building under her feet was also shaking. The medical equipment in the room kept shaking and making noises. Bai Qingqian could clearly feel the shaking of the floor. The ward seemed to be getting closer to the ground. The sound of breaking and the screams of dying were mixed together, and it was extremely chaotic in the increasingly subtle gunshots. Bai Qingqian gently turned around, sat by Dongcheng Rushi's bed, smoothed out her hair, and sighed. Dongcheng Rushi was still asleep. The famous sword was silent. Without the control of its master, it seemed to be completely dead. Bai Qingqian gently hummed the song that Dongqing Rushi liked to listen to when she was a child, and there was a touch of apology in her calm eyes. She had been staying in the hospital recently. She had noticed it the moment the Burning Legion attacked the hospital. But she just noticed it. The overwhelming lightning and the gunshots around the night sky were so clear that anyone could notice it as long as they were not fools. Bai Qingqian didn't know martial arts. In the chaos, it was impossible for her to leave the hospital with the unconscious Dongqing Rushi. There were 3 thundershocking realm experts stationed in the number 1 inpatient building. As soon as they were attacked, 2 of the thundershocking realm experts immediately fought the enemy, while the other one was responsible for taking them away. But the elevator had been completely destroyed, and the enemy's speed was even more incredible. When they went down to the 6th floor, the Burning Legion's powerhouses had already fought their way to the 5th floor and occupied the exit. They had no choice but to return to the 9th floor. The master in charge of escorting the mother and daughter was codenamed Sly Thorn. He was a very important main assassin of Sai City. He originally wanted to take Bai Qingqian away from the 9th floor. Although the height was high, it was nothing for a thundershocking realm master. With his strength, he was quite sure that he could protect Bai Qingqian if they broke out of the encirclement. It's just white. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Qingqian refused. Creepy Sting might be able to protect Bai Qingqian during the fall, but it was difficult to protect Dongqing Rushi, or it couldn't protect her at all. It wasn't a problem with his strength. It was because Dongqing Rushi's body couldn't withstand even a little bit of impact. With her fragile body now, maybe the moment she fell to the ground, what awaited her was death. It was impossible for Bai Qingqian to give up the daughter she had raised since childhood. There was no need to ask why. Even if the result of staying here was death. Bai Qingqian had already realized this when she saw the endless lightning converging and dispersing. He didn't know martial arts, but he knew what a thundershocking realm master meant. Especially a thundershocking realm master. With the intensity of tonight's surprise attack, any force would suffer heavy losses if they were unprepared. This was Yuzhou, and there was no heavy firepower in the hospital. Today, when most of the invincible realm masters in the Dark World had died, nearly 20 thundershocking realm masters and dozens of fire-flaming realm masters could completely represent the peak power of the Dark World. No matter how well prepared the hospital was, it couldn't withstand such a surprise attack. After realizing this, Bai Qingqian completely calmed down. She couldn't change the outcome. The only thing she could do seemed to be waiting. Instead of being tormented and fidgeting, it was better to accompany her child. The 10th minute. Bai Qingqian gently touched Dongqing Rushi's nose and smiled. At least we can still be together. Dongqing Rushi quietly closed her eyes and didn't move. There was a sudden knock on the door. Bai Qingqian raised her head slightly. A doctor in a white coat walked in without a sound. Bai Qingqian stared at the doctor with vigilance in her eyes. On such an occasion, she didn't think any doctor would be in the mood to do a ward round. The building kept shaking. The battle didn't stop. The gunshots, roars were close at hand. The Burning Legion had fought to the 8th floor. A rough and excited roar sounded particularly harsh in the battle. Bai Qingqian slowly stood up and said word by word, "Who are you?" The doctor looked at Bai Qingqian quietly, and then looked down at Dongqing Rushi. A strange smile gradually appeared in his eyes. What a pair of beauties! His voice was hoarse, but he spoke Chinese naturally and fluently. You know what? I've played with a lot of mothers and daughters, but most of them are some damn niggers. I promise, you're the most beautiful mother and daughter I've ever seen, and you're also the most distinguished. The speaker of Xianxia State, the wife of Minister Dongqing. What will it taste like? This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Bai Qingqian's eyes narrowed tightly. Are you from Xianxia State? She suddenly asked. There are people from Xianxia State in the Burning Legion? That's not surprising. The doctor took off his mask, revealing a completely unfamiliar face of an Asian man. He stared at him with a deathly stare. He looked at Bai Qingqian's face with greed and undisguised desire, but more regret. It's a pity that I'm in a hurry tonight. Otherwise, I'd definitely taste you. This may be one of the greatest achievements of my life, the craziest achievement. He shook his head and sighed. What a pity, what a pity, how did you get in? Bai Qingxian's eyes flashed fiercely, but her voice was still calm. The doctor smiled. In the loud noise outside, the battle was getting closer and closer to the ward. The enemy was approaching the 9th floor. I don't have much time, about 10 minutes left. I know you want to buy time. Although I don't know what's the point, I can help you. The doctor said with a smile. If you let me kiss you, I'll let you live for 1 more minute. How about that? His voice was a little fanatical. We can do something else at this time. Bai Qingxian's expression became calmer. You deserve to die. She looked at the doctor and said indifferently, You're offending the dignity of the whole Zhongzhou state now. I'm scared to death. The doctor laughed and stretched out a hand to grab Bai Qingxian's chest. Let me experience the dignity of Zhongzhou state tonight. Bai Qingxian took a small step to the side, and a trace of sarcasm flashed in her eyes. Boom! Endless power suddenly spread out behind Bai Qingxian. There was no lightning or raging fire. It was pure and condensed power. The steady but extremely heavy power did not destroy the ward at all, but it shrouded the doctor's body in an instant. Crash! In the chaotic noise, the battle outside finally swept the 9th floor. The doctor's expression changed dramatically and instinctively wanted to retreat to join the other members of the Burning Legion. But the absolute power force field suppressed him and made him unable to move at all. The absolute power was mighty. The window of the ward on the 9th floor was shattered silently. In the cold night wind, a figure covered in a black cloak stepped into the ward from the window behind Bai Qingxian. The doctor's pupils suddenly contracted, and he was horrified. Military counselor. Military counselor glanced at him. The endless power squeezed the doctor's body. He heard military counselor's indifferent voice. You're surrounded. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 697. The steady and heavy force field completely confined all the doctor's actions and firmly limited his counterattack. The doctor's brain was already in a mess. Military counselor. He didn't wonder why military counselor came here. When Li Tianlan first appeared in front of the people in the Dark World, Samsara Palace unabashedly showed its full support for him. Such support could be said to be almost at any cost. Now Samsara Palace was destroyed and the master of Samsara Palace died, but Qin Weibai's existence still carried out the will of Samsara Palace. And Saint's statement in Yuzhou also confirmed this fact. East Emperor Palace became Emperor Dong's palace. Obviously, part of the remaining power of Samsara Palace would be absorbed by Emperor Dong's palace. Military counselor and Saint would have a closer relationship with Li Tianlan in the future. In this respect, military counselor and giant group could also be said to be on the same side. At least, they were sufficiently loyal allies. If the hospital was in trouble, he would certainly not stand by. But what frightened the doctor was the timing of military counselor's appearance. It was the 11th minute since the battle began. Military counselor entered. This timing was too precise and timely. It couldn't be a coincidence that he joined the battlefield at such a time. It even gave people a feeling that military counselor had been near the hospital. At this moment, the doctor thought of military counselor's words. You are surrounded. A chill suddenly swept through the doctor's heart. If the encirclement was true, what did it mean? This meant that the hospital might not have been prepared for this attack, but the military counselor had completely expected their action, so he had set up an ambush nearby in advance. When they were full of confidence in killing in the hospital, the military counselor had already surrounded them with his men. The doctor's body trembled and his face turned pale. He was not afraid of death, but he couldn't figure out why military counselor could grasp their action. This time, the Burning Legion accepted the employment without leaking any information in advance. How did military counselor know that they would attack the hospital? Had the all-pervasive intelligence system of Samsara Palace already perceived the relationship between Kunlun City and the Burning Legion? But even so, military counselor couldn't know their specific action. Or rather, what else did he know? The doctor's heart suddenly sank. He seemed to think of something, and his whole body struggled wildly in the power field. Dense thunderbolts roared and surged around him, and the stable power field gently shook under the impact of the thunderbolts. The military counselor remained calm. He was a real top figure at the peak of the half-step invincible realm. In terms of realm alone, he was like Li Tianlan, Gong Sun Qi, Wei Kunlun and Di Jiang before the breakthrough, or Wang Xiaoyao. The top of the half-step invincible realm was the combat capability of the invincible realm. Military counselor was no longer young, and there was no hope for him to break through to the invincible realm. But after years of tempering his strength, he had already perfected it. Now this field created by pure strength was his domain, and it was not much worse than the domain of the real invincible realm. It's useless. Military counselor looked at the doctor who was struggling crazily and said indifferently, "You know that you can't break free. Your strength lies in hiding. I saw the process of your raid, and the direction was very clear. Someone must have snuck into the hospital in advance and set up the explosives. They also found out the location of many important people. You are the only one in the Burning Legion who can do this. Soul Shadow, you shouldn't have refused Sai City's invitation. If a natural assassin like you had joined Sai City, things would have been different today." Soul Shadow. This was the code name of the doctor who quietly crossed the battlefield and entered the ward in the Dark World. Soul Shadow, who was constantly struggling, suddenly stiffened. It was normal for military counselor to know his code name, but he didn't expect that military counselor also knew that he had refused Sai City's invitation. Soul Shadow suddenly felt extremely frightened. He looked at military counselor and opened his mouth, with fear in his eyes. "Do you need me to tell you the code name you used before?" Military counselor looked at Soul Shadow with cold eyes. He really knew everything. Soul Shadow's body shook, and he stared at military counselor. "Military counselor, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Military counselor didn't continue to attack. He just said calmly, "You have another choice." This sentence was full of hints. Soul Shadow's eyes were in a trance for a moment. Military counselor looked at him with cold and deep eyes. "I see." Soul Shadow suddenly laughed, and his expression became a little relaxed. At this moment, the thing he was most worried about became the least thing he needed to worry about. Because it was obvious that military counselor knew the truth, but he didn't want others to know that he knew the truth. The truth was sometimes too horrible. At least now, Emperor Dong's palace couldn't afford to say it. "I'll keep this in mind." Military counselor took a deep look at Soul Shadow and said calmly, "It doesn't matter." Soul Shadow chuckled and said, "What we need most is time." Military counselor snorted and didn't say anything. The battle outside was still going on. More violent gunshots sounded downstairs, which had been quiet. Obviously, the reinforcements brought by military counselor were fighting with the super elites of the Burning Legion who were below the thunder-shocking realm. Soul Shadow was silent for a moment and asked, "You knew we would come?" "Just in case. This place is so important, so we have to keep a hand. But I didn't expect someone to be so stupid." Military counselor's eyes flashed with disbelief. Obviously, he didn't mean Soul Shadow when he said stupid. "He's really stupid, which surprised us," Soul Shadow said with a smile, "and it can be foreseen that he will continue to be stupid." "Poor thing," military counselor said calmly. "Pathetic." Soul Shadow sighed slightly. "But this is exactly what I want," military counselor said slowly. Soul Shadow understood. Maybe this was the reason why military counselor chose not to know the truth. He nodded and said, "It's a good choice." Military counselor didn't say anything. Soul Shadow smiled and said softly, "Then, goodbye." "Goodbye," military counselor said calmly. Soul Shadow closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In an instant, his body began to swell in the force field. The most powerful force gathered in his body and turned into dazzling lightning. In an instant, the bones and muscles of Soul Shadow's whole body were completely shattered. This was his other choice. Military counselor knew the truth, but he didn't want Li Tianlan to know. With his strength, it was not difficult to capture Soul Shadow alive after imprisoning him. But the problem was that if he wanted to cover up the truth completely, Soul Shadow couldn't be alive. Military counselor couldn't take action. It was doubtful that he killed someone when he could have captured him alive. So Soul Shadow could only choose to die by himself, and he did it in the most unyielding way. 1 second. His body swelled. 1 second later, endless lightning burst out in military counselor's force field, along with surging flesh and bone fragments. Military counselor didn't stop it. At the moment when the lightning surged with flesh and blood, he slowly reached out his hand and pressed down hard on the force field that imprisoned Soul Shadow. The whole force field suddenly began to shrink. The space inside the ward was distorted in a state visible to the naked eye. Military counselor took a step forward. The frenzied airflow in the ward turned into a hurricane. The lightning that Soul Shadow was determined to break out in the force field suddenly stopped. In the fierce wind, the transparent but extremely thick force field suddenly began to compress. The force field became smaller and smaller, containing the majestic power and infinite lightning. It shrank the flesh and blood of Soul Shadow and finally turned into a sphere. Military counselor raised his eyebrows and moved his palm slightly. The spherical force field with great destructive power landed in his hands. It flickered with a faint blue light, like a sparkling and translucent crystal. Military counselor breathed a sigh of relief. The next second, a large mouthful of blood sprayed directly from his mouth. His body went limp. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He almost fell to the ground. Bai Qingqian, who had been watching all this, was slightly shocked and subconsciously supported military counselor. She frowned slightly and said, "You're injured?" Even if she didn't understand martial arts, she knew military counselor's status in the dark world. Military counselor couldn't be injured in any case if he killed an ordinary thundershocking realm expert. Military counselor smiled bitterly, shook his head, and didn't speak. His injuries were all old injuries. At that time, the 4 strongest supermasters of Samsara Palace lurked in Mount Dibbing and were seriously injured by summer solstice in an instant. That was the injury left before the chaos in Eastern Europe began, and it still hadn't improved until today. Now military counselor reluctantly took action. The old injury suddenly broke out. Military counselor looked at his watch and took a deep breath. It's hard for me to take action next. But it's almost time. You didn't surround them at all, did you? Bai Qingqian suddenly asked. Military counselor was stunned. Bai Qingqian said blandly, "If you really had the power to destroy them, you wouldn't have done it yourself." Military counselor was injured. If he was really sure tonight, he wouldn't have done it himself. The other people of Samsara Palace were enough to solve everything. Military counselor smiled bitterly. The encirclement is real, but it's also fake. Such an encirclement really exists, but its strength is not strong. We underestimated the strength of the Burning Legion and didn't know enough about their internal intelligence. It's hard for the people I brought to kill the Burning Legion, but at least we can delay Yuzhou to respond. You knew they were coming? Bai Qingqian's eyes were a little sharp. Why didn't you inform us in advance? We could have made enough preparations. Military counselor was silent for a while. He didn't know what to say. Many people died in the hospital tonight. To some extent, it could be avoided as long as he informed them in advance. But the problem was that military counselor really couldn't inform the hospital in advance to be prepared. It was not that he didn't want to. He couldn't. All the deaths in the hospital were to cover up the truth that Soul Shadow would rather die than hide. It was cruel. But it was necessary. Believe me, military counselor said blandly, you don't want to know the answer. Is this your explanation? Bai Qingqian asked softly. Military counselor didn't speak. He didn't need to explain anything to Bai Qingqian, but the most troublesome thing was that he had to explain to Li Tianlan next. And the answer he gave Bai Qingqian would obviously not satisfy Li Tianlan. Why did these people attack the hospital? Bai Qingqian was silent for a while and suddenly asked. Military counselor still didn't answer. He reluctantly stood up and walked to the door. The blue orb flickered more and more rapidly in his hand. Military counselor stood in the corridor and took a look. In front of him were the elites of the hospital. And a little ahead, the Burning Legion was fiercely tearing the defense line of the hospital. Military counselor narrowed his eyes. He raised his hand and directly threw the ball shining with blue light in his hand. The ball flew across the corridor and landed in the crowd of the Burning Legion. Boom! In the loud roar, the magnificent field and the endless lightning collided and burst out in an instant. Blood rained. Several elites of the Burning Legion were blown to pieces on the spot, and 2 thundershocking realm experts were seriously injured. Radel, who had rushed to the 9th floor, was covered in blood. He roared, and his fighting spirit soared. Further away, outside the hospital, the endless army had madly rushed over. Radel, whose face was full of killing intent, shook his fat body and was about to continue charging. In the communicator, the voice of Schiller, the deputy commander of the Burning Legion, sounded, "Radel, retreat." "What?" Radel roared, "We still have time." "There is no time. The reinforcements of the Samsara Palace are rushing over. We need time to break through. The operation has failed." Schiller gritted his teeth. "Retreat now, this is an order." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 698. Retreat. An extremely firm order was hurriedly and clearly transmitted into the ears of every Burning Legion member. Everyone could feel the grievance in Schiller's voice. They broke into the hospital smoothly and approached the inpatient building like a hot knife through butter. Led by Vajra Radel, the number 1 inpatient building had already reached the 9th floor where the target was. Schiller was already halfway to the top floor of the number 2 inpatient building. The target's gathering place was 20 meters ahead of them. But at this time, they had to retreat. To be honest, Schiller didn't know how much resistance they would encounter during their retreat, but he didn't dare to bet on it. With their strength tonight, if they were to continue fighting, they would be able to take care of at least half of the targets in 3 minutes. But they were also destined to pay an unimaginable price. And such a price wasn't something the Burning Legion could afford. Tonight's raid had mobilized most of the Burning Legion's high-end combat power. If these people were left in Yuzhou, the Burning Legion would only exist in name except for Ramelin, the Legion commander. A plan to weaken the support around Li Tianlan wasn't worth the entire Burning Legion dying with them. So retreat. They had to retreat. A few minutes seemed insignificant, but in a battle behind enemy lines, a few seconds was often enough to determine life and death. So the moment he made up his mind, Schiller didn't hesitate at all and quickly turned around to retreat. He was so determined to retreat that he didn't even look back until his figure disappeared. The Burning Legion experts who raided the number 2 inpatient building reacted at the same time and quickly retreated. Kill them all, our reinforcements are here. In the number 2 inpatient building, a thundershocking realm elder of Jade Pool who was in charge of the hospital defense roared and chased after them with the remaining elites of the hospital. Violent gunshots rang out incessantly downstairs. The whole hospital was full of flashing lights and shadows, and countless bullets whistled through the light and shadows. The 15th minute. The Burning Legion rushed out of the inpatient building and met the reinforcements brought by military counselor. A fierce battle broke out in an instant and ended quickly. The 16th minute. The experts of the Burning Legion gathered and directly penetrated the reinforcements' formation in just a few dozen seconds. They retreated all the way. Blood was everywhere. The 17th minute. The Burning Legion retreated from the hospital. Almost at the same time, Kunlun City, the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, the National Security Agency, the Shadow Sting Army, the Shadow Sect, the Garrison Force of Yuzhou, and nearly 10,000 people directly rushed into the hospital. The Burning Legion collided with the vanguard of Yuzhou. The 19th minute. The Burning Legion successfully retreated from the battlefield. The 20th minute. The Parliament of Zhongzhou State, the Army Headquarters, Kunlun City, the National Security Agency, the Police Department, and many other departments jointly issued an arrest warrant. Countless forces of Zhongzhou State, whether overt or covert, took action at the first time. At the same time, they blocked airports, stations, and all traffic intersections. Operation Codename Dragnet. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State, who had just returned to Yuzhou from Lin, and personally ordered that the thugs who dared to commit murder in Yuzhou must pay the price. 25th minute. The news of the fall of Tiannan and the attack on Zhongzhou State spread out in all directions, directly turning into a frenzy that swept the entire Dark World. Burning Legion. There was no doubt that it was the protagonist of the Dark World tonight. This was a force that had been quietly accepting employment from various parties in Africa. They were powerful, but not many people paid much attention to them. Overnight, they appeared in front of everyone with their strongest stance. People were shocked. The Burning Legion's high-end combat strength was terrifying, and it also shocked the Burning Legion's overall quality. Nearly 20 Thundershocking Realm experts raided Yuzhou. 2 half-step Invincible Realm experts. Several Thundershocking Realm experts. And ordinary Thundershocking Realm experts. Few forces in the entire Dark World could offer such power. Such a lineup was enough to explain everything. Many forces that had traded with the Burning Legion in Africa didn't know that there were so many experts in the Burning Legion. What was even more surprising was that when these experts were lurking in Yuzhou, Ramiro could lead the Burning Legion to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and defeat the Freedom Corps that had dominated Tiannan for several years. During the whole process, Ramiro didn't even make a move. This was a Burning Legion without experts. In the Battle of Tiannan, the most important thing was the combat strength of ordinary elites. When these most basic combat strengths were gathered, they formed a force that could impact everything. The Freedom Corps was an elite that Zhongzhou State and the Wang family of Beihai had secretly cultivated for several years. Among them, there was even a part of the Thunderbolt Battalion. Whether in terms of personnel quality or equipment, it could be said to be the best. However, such a Freedom Corps lost to the Burning Legion when the number of people was almost the same. This was enough to show the powerful combat strength of the Burning Legion. Now, it was obvious that they had the support of Annan State. The southern area of Tiannan could be regarded as the foundation of the Burning Legion. What did this mean? An Invincible Realm expert was in charge, sufficient high-end combat strength, elite grassroots forces, and a solid foundation. All of this combined, there was only one name for such a force in the Dark World. Super Force. Like the Wang family of Beihai, like the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, like the former Jiang family of South America, the Heroes Club, and even the Shadow Throne, Super Force. Even the former Samsara Palace couldn't be regarded as a super force. But now, when most of the super forces had lost their supreme combat power, a new super force had appeared in front of everyone in the Dark World in the most powerful manner, almost without warning. Some people were excited, some were frightened, some were ready to make a move, and some were eyeing covetously. But at this moment, more people in the Dark World were silent. Because of strangeness. Today's Dark World seemed to have become more and more strange. The feeling of alternation was so obvious. Most of the familiar Invincible Realm experts had died, and those who were still alive were seriously injured. The new Invincible Realm experts were replacing the light of the former Invincible Realm experts. The former super forces were also gradually quieting down, and the new super force was rising. There were more new Invincible Realm experts. The Burning Legion was definitely not the only new super force. The huge impact seemed to hit everyone in the Dark World with a brand new power. Arcis, Cass Rotter, King Tong, Jiang Qiansong, Charlemagne. The names that used to shine in the Dark World had completely dimmed, become memories, and become the past. A new chapter had begun. So all the memories in the past were clearly turned over, and then became history. At this moment, everyone in the Dark World stood at the intersection of the old and the new eras. They felt the clear and obvious changes that were getting faster and faster. Their minds were complicated and they were at a loss. The old era was over. The old era was completely over. The 30th minute. Late at night. Lonely Mountain. Most people had left. Li Tianlan, who was chatting with Wang Xianxia, finally received news from Tiannan and Yuzhou. One in the south and the other in the north. The news on both sides was completely synchronized. Almost all the people who were still on Lonely Mountain received the news. For a moment, the ringing of mobile phones surrounded almost everyone's ears. Li Beitian, who had just fallen asleep, almost rushed out in exasperation. He gritted his teeth and came to Li Tianlan's side. He lowered his voice, but it was trembling and a little distorted because of anger. Tianlan, something happened in Tiannan. Emperor Dong's palace was raided by the Burning Legion. His voice was very slow, as if he was suppressing the anger and killing intent in his heart. Our headquarters was destroyed. Emperor Dong's palace suffered heavy casualties. F***ck 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 I'll kill all those bastards. In the past few months, Li Beidian had put in a lot of effort in Tiannan. Emperor Dong's palace finally had a prototype, but tonight everything went back to square one, and the graduates they brought out from the two academies were even more seriously injured. This knife was almost stabbed in the chest of the new Emperor Dong's palace. Blood was dripping, and it was extremely cruel. Li Beidian's whole body was trembling. His breathing was rapid, and everything in front of him seemed to be spinning. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly and was silent for a long time. He had received the news. Not only did all the efforts of Emperor Dong's palace in Tiannan go to waste, but the hospital of the giant group in Yuzhou was also raided. Nearly 20 thundershocking realm experts were attacked. If military counselor hadn't led people to delay them, not only Emperor Dong's palace, but almost all the help around Li Tianlan would have been affected. It was Dong Qingwudi who brought him the news. Dong Qingwudi had set off for Yuzhou as soon as he received the news. Li Tianlan's brain tried hard to digest the information. The sudden outbreak of anger and coldness had been suppressed by him, and now he was terrifyingly calm. This is not an accident, Li Tianlan said lightly. Of course it's not an accident. Li Beidian growled, and there were even tears in his eyes. More and more people gathered around him. Li Beidian, Ning Qianxing, Lin Yuxian, Yuqing and Yudonglai. Qin Weibai, Wei Kunlun, the last remaining old people of the Li family. Exclamations rang out from around. Obviously, they all received the same news. Countless eyes gathered on Li Tianlan. At this moment, everyone looked at him with complicated eyes. There must be a factor of Annan state in the Burning Legion's attack on Tiannan, but this is only part of it. If that's the case, it's normal for Emperor Dong's palace to be attacked. Li Tianlan took several deep breaths and then said lightly, but when the war in Tiannan broke out, our people in Yuzhou were also attacked. What does this mean? Annan state is targeting us. Li Beidian, who was confused, said subconsciously. Everyone shook their heads at the same time. Annan state did not completely control the Burning Legion. There is a force behind the Burning Legion that is targeting us. Qin Weibai said softly. Who could it be? Saint asked. Somehow, his voice sounded a little dry. Li Tianlan gave him a meaningful look and said flatly, there's no need to guess. Just ask Ramelin. What? Everyone's heart trembled. Li Tianlan's eyes glanced around and fell on Zhou Yuanshan. He said calmly, brother-in-law, I need a special plane to Tiannan. Zhou Yuanshan hesitated and nodded. Li Tianlan turned around, looked at Saint, and said lightly, contact military counselor for me. Chapter 699. Military counselor did not leave the hospital. When the video communication from Lin and was connected, the hospital behind him was still burning. Two severely tilted inpatient buildings were reflected on the screen, looking a little bleak. Military counselor's face was covered by a black cloak. In the burning light and shadow, he looked at Li Tianlan's calm expression on the screen, opened his mouth, and said in a hoarse voice, Your Highness. How's the battle damage? Li Tianlan asked. This was a question that everyone was concerned about. It happened suddenly. Whether it was Tiannan or Yuzhou, they only passed on the most important information. There was no accurate number yet. Still counting. Military counselor took a deep breath, and his voice became more and more difficult. Then tell me what has been counted now. Li Tianlan said. In his sight, in the chaotic light and shadow, Military Counselor's body trembled obviously, and he did not speak for a while. This reaction was too obvious. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly sank, and he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Who's in trouble? Military Counselor was silent for a while, slowly lowered his head, and said at an extremely slow speed, Mrs. Dongqing and Rushi are fine. Tribulation is fine. The 4 spirits are fine. The 2 sword masters of Mount Shu are also fine. Li Tianlan looked at him, and his eyes flashed with threatening sharpness. Military Counselor did not seem to know what to say, and finally smiled bitterly. In the hospital, more than 400 elites died in the battle, and the number of seriously injured is about twice as many as the number of people who died in the battle. Nearly half of them have been unable to recover their combat capability. Nearly 100 medical staff of the hospital were injured or killed, and a guest official and an elder of Mount Shu died in the battle. 2 guest officials of Jade Pool died in the battle. Zhan Hu of Shadow Sect died. His voice was getting lower and lower, but as he spoke, the atmosphere on the entire lonely mountain became depressing. Some people could not even stand steadily. 400 elites died in the battle, 400 elites who had completely lost their combat capability, and hundreds of medical staff were injured or killed. The defense power of the hospital was almost weakened by half. In addition, every staff member in the hospital was an elite in the same field, and some of them were real experts and professors poached by the giant group with their resources. The casualties of these people also greatly reduced the medical level of the hospital. As for the guest elder of Mount Shu and the guest elder of Jade Pool, as a famous swordsmanship force in Zhongzhou State, whether it was Mount Shu or Jade Pool, they needed hard strength to become a guest official. Thundershocking realm. This was the most basic threshold. As for the elders of the 2 superpowers, only the experts in the Thundershocking realm could assume the post. There was also Shadow Sect's War Tiger. Overnight, just as Military Counselor said, 5 experts of the Thundershocking realm had been killed. Li Tianlan clenched his teeth tightly. His voice was like the chilly wind blowing from the 9 serenities of hell, cold and awe-inspiring. What else? The Chess Emperor is dead, and East Peak. The Military Counselor's voice stuttered a few times, which was very rare. Li Tianlan's body shook violently, and he held the tablet in his hand tightly. Chess Emperor. East Peak. This was the biggest loss of the night. Chess Emperor was an old member of the Li family, and he was the first guard of Li Guangtu back then. His status could be imagined. If the Li family had not collapsed, after Li Honghe, Chess Emperor could be said to be the Li family's well-deserved first think tank in the new team with Li Guangtu as the core. Chess Emperor had been following Li Honghe in recent years. Although he was Li Guangtu's close guard, he was very kind to Li Tianlan. It could be said that he was one of Li Tianlan's most respected elders. In terms of strength, Chess Emperor was a genius. But his comprehensive strength might not be worse than Military Counselors. They were both top experts of the half-step invincible realm. In Mormon's, 13 half-step invincible realm experts plus flaming fire formed the sword formation of 13-story buildings, and then there was the eternal sword of Samsara Palace Master. Among the 13 half-step invincible realm experts, Chess Emperor was one of them, and he was a very important member. And now, this man, who was already in his 50s, who had dedicated most of his life to the Li family, who had promised him when he was a child that he would plan a great empire for him, died just like that. Not died in battle. But when he was at his weakest, when he was attacked by the enemy, he died in the hospital bed. He didn't even wake up from the coma until he died. How aggrieved he was. And East Peak was a half-step invincible realm expert who was in the same ward with Chess Emperor. He was one of the trump cards of the Dongqing clan, and now he died just like that. 5 Thundershocking realm experts. 2 half-step invincible realm experts. Nearly 1,000 elites. A sea of blood. Li Tianlan felt dizzy. Extreme anger surged and condensed in his heart, and finally burst out. This seemed to be the first time he couldn't control his emotions at all. The majestic anger almost completely destroyed his reason in an instant. His voice was piercingly cold, like the ice that would never melt all year round. There was a trembling killing intent between the lines. Give me an explanation. Military counselor. His voice was extremely heavy. Since he entered the secular world, he had several contacts with military counselor. This was the first time he got angry at military counselor. In fact, military counselor didn't explicitly say that he would join the East Emperor Palace like Saint, but he couldn't help it. At this moment, Li Tianlan felt that the air he breathed was burning with fierce flames, almost burning him up. Military counselor could ambush in advance. Obviously, he had known that the hospital would be in danger. If he could inform the hospital in advance, Chess Emperor, East Peak, and everyone else would not have died. There was no if. Military counselor didn't say it. So tonight they faced such a heavy loss, so heavy that no one could bear to look at it. It's my mistake. Military counselor was silent for a while and said hoarsely, I seriously underestimated the strength of the Burning Legion. I'm mainly responsible for this. I was greedy and rash. I thought I could solve the problem with the power in my hands, so I didn't inform the hospital in advance. Saint had a complicated look in his eyes. Qin Weibai sighed quietly. Is this your explanation? Li Tianlan's voice was cold. It's my mistake. Military counselor lowered his head, and his voice became deeper. Investigate. Li Tianlan squeezed the tablet in his hand hard. His arms were shaking. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, I have no grudge against Ramiro. If there were no special reasons, he wouldn't target East Emperor Palace. But since he dared to stretch out his claws to me, he can forget about taking them back. Military counselor, I'll give you 3 days. I want the heads of all the murderers who attacked the hospital. Find them for me one by one. Understood. Military counselor took a deep breath. I'll do it right away. Li Tianlan directly hung up the communication. He glanced at Saint and said calmly, You go to Yuzhou. During this time, stay in the hospital. You don't want me to go with you to Tianan? Saint frowned slightly. Li Tianlan had transferred his private plane as soon as the incident happened. With his temper, it was impossible for him not to fight back after being beaten. His trip to Tianan was destined to be bloody. At this time, Saint wanted to stay with Li Tianlan. At least he could take care of him. No need. Li Tianlan's voice was cold. The hospital is more important. I can only rest assured if you are in Yuzhou. Saint wanted to say more, but Qin Weibai shook her head slightly at him. Then I'll go back to Yuzhou. She looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, Be careful. Li Tianlan's expression softened and he nodded. What about the private plane? He looked back at Zhou Yuanshan. It's arranged. The helicopter will land at the foot of the mountain in 15 minutes. Zhou Yuanshan said. Li Tianlan nodded. Let's go. Li Baidian, Ning Qianqing, and Lin Yuxian. A group of young high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace followed Li Tianlan down the mountain at the same time. The last few veterans of the Li family looked at each other and followed Li Tianlan at the same time. The tablet that Li Tianlan had been holding in his hand suddenly lit up again. Li Tianlan picked up the video and raised his eyebrows slightly. It was a video of Li Huaqing. Tianlan, what do you think about what happened in Tianan? Li Huaqing's voice was low and serious. I don't want to see it. Li Tianlan said faintly, an eye for an eye. Since the Burning Legion dared to take action, Ramelun should be prepared for revenge. I don't intend to swallow it. I just talked to Ziyuan on the phone. He just arrived in Tianan, and the situation is not optimistic. Not only Emperor Dong's palace, but the Freedom Corps also suffered heavy losses. Tunan City has completely fallen, and the Freedom Corps has now retreated to Ningbian City. But judging from the current situation of the Burning Legion, they obviously don't intend to let it go. It is said that the Burning Legion has begun to gather troops and converge with the rebel army. It seems that they intend to take down Ningbian in one go. There was a hidden anger in Li Huaqing's voice. Ningbian was a city close to the border of Zhongzhou State. Once Ningbian fell after Tunan, it meant that Zhongzhou State lost control of Tianan. All the forces of Zhongzhou State, on the surface and in the dark, would be kicked out of Tianan. It would be very troublesome if they wanted to intervene in Tiannan in the future. Moreover, Zhongzhou State's investment in Tiannan in the past few years would be completely wasted. Ningbian. Li Tunlan twitched the corner of his mouth. He can't take down Ningbian. Even if it's Tunan City, he will completely spit it out for me. Li Huaqing was stunned and said slowly, "What's your plan?" "Not yet." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Wait until I get to Tiannan." "Tiannan? You want to go to Tiannan?" But Li Huaqing was slightly surprised. "Tunlan, don't be impulsive. In fact, Zhongzhou State has decided to secretly support the Freedom Corps. The parliament has decided to hold a meeting in 3 hours. You are the Marshal of Zhongzhou State and now one of the strongest forces in Zhongzhou State. You come back to attend the meeting first. After we confirm the list of support for the Freedom Corps, you will lead the team. It's too slow." Li Tianlan said lightly, "I can't wait that long." He said no more and hung up the communication directly. With a pinch of his hand, the tablet had become a pile of parts. In the distance, the roar of the helicopter's rotors sounded faintly. Li Tianlan threw the parts in his hand on the ground and looked back at Lonely Mountain. He really didn't expect such a thing to happen. When Li Honghe's funeral had just come to an end. If Grandpa knew this in the afterlife, he would be very disappointed with him in the face of such a thing, wouldn't he? Li Tianlan clenched his fists and looked at the helicopter that was slowly landing. He said lightly, "Let's go back." Chapter 700. Flames burned the night sky. Dawn was coming. In the darkest night before dawn, the flames of war in Tunan City had completely subsided. The chaos was still spreading, but the Burning Legion had officially entered Tunan City and taken over the order of Tunan City. Ramiro quietly patrolled the city that had fallen into his hands. His whole body was almost integrated with the night sky. He silently moved forward, shuttling through the streets and alleys of the city like a ghost in the dark. Blood and corpses could be seen everywhere on the streets. The air was still filled with the smell of blood. This smell blended with the burning flames and stimulated people's sense of smell. It was war, death, and the smell of gunpowder. Ramiro's figure flickered and appeared at the top of a bell tower. This was the tallest enemy in Tunan City. The nearly 120-meter-tall bell tower was located in the center of the city, less than 200 meters away from the city hall. Standing on the bell tower, most of Tunan City could be seen in the night sky. Most of the residents of Tunan City remained silent in the dead silence. The streets, however, were extremely lively. The Burning Legion and the Annan rebel army walked in groups in the city. Countless people carried the corpses of the dead and piled them together. The fire of burning the corpses almost illuminated the entire city. Faint light filled the deep night, reflecting the large ruins destroyed by the battle. The entire Tunan City had a touch of desolation and ferocity after the war. Ramiro silently watched, motionless. The strongest king in Africa today did not have a prominent background, nor did he have a heroic story. Like countless families destroyed by war, Ramiro came from an ordinary small country in Africa. His parents and family were killed in the war, leaving only him and his younger sister. The war destroyed all the order in the country. Faced with the absurd situation of having tens of millions of local currency but being unable to afford a meal, Ramiro traded all the resources of his family for an AK-49, the most classic assault rifle. That year, Ramiro was 12 years old. He took his own weapon and joined the local rebel army. He didn't even know what he was fighting against. At that time, his biggest wish was to live and be with his sister. If it could be worse. He just hoped that he and his sister could live a better life. From the domestic rebel army to private armed forces, small mercenary groups, and large mercenary groups. Wandering from place to place. He had been fighting all his life. There was not much warmth or beauty. Blood and smoke filled his blood. He made progress again and again. His talent, which was not very outstanding, was brought into full play by him. Chi commanding, ice condensing, fire flaming, thunder shocking realm. To be invincible. Step by step, he finally became the guardian deity in the hearts of countless people in Africa. But Ramiro didn't think he was a god. He felt that he was a wise man. He had won countless brilliant victories along the way, but he was not blinded by any glory or temptation. Even though he was now an invincible realm expert, he still managed his burning legion with the most cautious attitude. Steady, low-key, and calm. This kind of burning core made almost everyone feel that the burning core was not a threat, and they felt that the burning core was very useful. Ramiro was definitely a smart man. He didn't have the pride and dignity of the so-called invincible realm experts. Compared with experts in the same realm, he was better at compromise, concession, and forbearance than anyone else. As a result, the scale of the Burning Legion grew larger and stronger, gradually becoming recognized as the #1 legion in Africa. At this time, Ramiro made another extremely correct decision. When the Burning Legion became the #1 legion in Africa, he gave up the title of the #1 expert in Africa. And he also gave it to a black man. The Burning Legion had been developing for many years, but it had only become recognized as the #1 legion in Africa in recent years. In recent years, there had been a second invincible realm expert in Africa besides Ramiro. The invincible realm expert was almost the complete opposite of Ramiro. Compared with Ramiro, who was calm and collected, the other party was arrogant and surly. He didn't restrain himself at all. As soon as he entered the invincible realm, he began to rob the interests of the major European consortiums. Compared with experts in the same realm, his extremely weak defense was exchanged for absolute powerful attack power. As soon as he appeared, Ramiro, who had watched his battle, personally admitted that he was not as good as the other party. As a result, some people in the Burning Legion left. But the people who stayed once again consolidated the defense power of the Burning Legion. Ramiro was still calm and collected. He coldly watched the invincible realm expert catch up from behind and become more and more popular. When the major consortiums in Africa suffered heavy losses, they had also hired the Burning Legion to deal with the other party, but Ramiro refused that employment. So the other party acted more unscrupulously, and finally, the title of the #1 expert in Africa was completely confirmed. During that time, the Burning Legion was almost completely forgotten. The whole of Africa seemed to only know Black Ghost. Black Ghost made threatening gestures in Africa, and the Burning Legion operated in a low-key manner in Africa. Then the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out. The Burning Legion finally began to move after countless years of forbearance. Black Ghost, who had stolen the limelight, finally died in the hands of Li Tianlan in the chaos in Eastern Europe. After countless years of preparation, the Burning Legion marched into Tiananmen and swept everything away. It seemed to have become the first superpower to rise in the new era. Ramiro looked into the distance. In the night, his eyes were still cautious, but he knew very well that from tonight on, the entire Tiananmen would be under his control. He would control Tiananmen and become the only master of this land of more than 30,000 square kilometers. He liked this title very much. The cell phone rang for a moment on the silent bell tower. Ramiro took out his cell phone in silence. It was not a video call, not a phone call, just a very simple text message. The encrypted number showed a string of asterisks. There was no content in the text message, only a question mark. Ramiro's eyes narrowed, and he also did not answer any words. He just replied with a big exclamation mark. The other end of the phone was silent for a moment, and then replied again. This time, it was an ellipsis. Ramiro smiled and replied with a full stop. All the information was transmitted in 4 punctuation marks. The other end of the phone stopped replying. Ramiro carefully deleted the text messages one by one, and his eyes were a little strange. That kind of eyes was not unwilling or angry or resentful, but a very clear kind of thinking, with a little hesitation and solemnity. In any case, the person behind the text message could be said to be the benefactor of the Burning Legion, and also Ramiro's benefactor. Ramiro did not deny that without the man behind him, he would not have reached the invincible realm, and the Burning Legion would not have been as big as it was today. For so many years, if it were not for the large amount of secret funding from the other party, he might still be wandering in the thunder-shocking realm today. The Burning Legion could at best be regarded as a large mercenary group, not a superpower at all. And it could be foreseen that as long as the person behind the scenes could still control the Burning Legion through Ramiro, the large amount of funding from the other party would not stop. However, Ramiro was thinking whether such funding was still needed for the Burning Legion. He had already occupied the Heavenly South. This land of more than 30,000 square kilometers was still very barren. However, to determine whether a region was prosperous or not, apart from some hardware facilities and geographical advantage, the most important factor was whether the region had enough order to attract people. From this point of view, the development potential of Tiannan was quite amazing. As long as he could completely control Tiannan, given time, it might become the second Wang family of Beihai in the Dark World. All the superpowers in the Dark World had their own foundation and territory. But in the vast Dark World, only the Wang family of Beihai really had an independent foundation. On the 160,000 square kilometers of land of Beihai, all the army recruitment came from the order of Mount Dibbing. All the appointment and dismissal of officials also came from the order of Mount Dibbing. All the rules of the game were made by the Wang family of Beihai. The star flag of Zhongzhou State fluttered in Beihai province, but the will of Mount Dibbing was everything in Beihai, and it was really above Zhongzhou State. What Tiannan was pursuing at present was the future of Beihai. He controlled Tiannan and already had the capital to ignore the person behind the scenes. Ramiro did not want to betray. He had today's status because he never courted death. But with his current strength and foundation, he felt that he was already qualified to discuss with the other party a relatively freer mode of cooperation. Of course, the premise was to help the other party get through the near-fatal difficulties. This required more control of Tiannan. While pondering, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. The phone was connected almost immediately. The whistling sound of the rotors was faint. What was clearer was Minister Jin's complacent laughter. "Well done, Your Highness Ramiro. On behalf of Annan, I thank the Burning Legion for their contribution." "Minister Jin," Ramiro said calmly, "it's too early for you to be happy." "How come?" Minister Jin said with some surprise. "As far as I know, the Burning Legion and the rebel army have occupied Tunnan City and 3 military bases around Tunnan City. They have gained a lot of advanced armaments." Indeed," Ramiro said lightly, "but that's not enough. I need your army to gather again." The solemn night seemed to gradually disperse. Ramiro looked at the night sky in the distance and said lightly, "I want to take Ningbian before dark." Minister Jin was a little speechless for a moment. All this seemed to happen too fast. "I need the help of Annan State, the help of the real elite army." Ramiro said slowly, "I am willing to abide by the final agreement. As long as you help me take down Tiannan, the Burning Legion is also willing to protect Annan State in the future." This was the final agreement between the Burning Legion and Annan State. It was also the agreement that Annan State had been seeking for several years. As long as they took down Tiannan, Ramiro would be the war god of Annan State from now on. In recent decades, Annan State did not have its own invincible realm expert. Ramiro was undoubtedly the most worthy target for them. Minister Jin hesitated for a moment and then said in a deep voice, "Yes, Your Highness. Wait for my news." "Don't call me Your Highness," Ramiro said calmly. "From now on, call me Dominator." Chapter 701. Tunnan City Hall. In the conference room. When Ramelin walked in, the spacious conference room was already full of people. At this moment, most of the people sitting in the conference room were unfamiliar faces to Ramelin. They were all middle and high-level officers of the Burning Legion, the most important cornerstone of the Burning Legion. To some extent, these people were currently some capable deputy officers in the Burning Legion. After all, the Burning Legion was just a legion. To put it bluntly, it was a large mercenary corps. Its internal system was relatively simple, and its general development plan was also focused on combat. Ramelin had to make arrangements for the real experts of the Burning Legion. Almost all the high-level positions within the Burning Legion were held by experts of the Thundershocking realm. However, it was the middle and high-level officers who were really responsible for commanding the battle in front of him. This was also the reason why the Burning Legion's offensive was so strong tonight. Those experts could make the Burning Legion sharper, but without them, it would not affect the integrity of the Burning Legion. In such a development, the ones who felt the most aggrieved were the deputy officers sitting in the conference room in front of him. However, the situation had changed from today onwards. The Burning Legion, which occupied Tian'an, now had the embryonic form of a superpower. In the following time, the Burning Legion would inevitably be reorganized internally, turning from a legion into a superpower that truly spanned all fields. This meant countless opportunities. Everyone present had enough opportunities to take charge of the Burning Legion's territory in the future. Ramelun sent most of the experts out and left these people behind. It was not necessarily without the intention of getting in touch with them and understanding each other. Annan's defense minister, Jin Yongqing, was also sitting in the conference room. Seeing Ramelun come in, everyone got up at the same time. "Your Highness, Lord." But this was the code name Ramelun gave himself. It was not a new code name. When the Burning Legion was called the First Legion in Africa, Ramelun himself did not have a code name. This alone showed that he was low-key. "Sit down." Ramelun waved his hand, walked to the main seat and sat down. Without any polite greetings, he said straightforwardly, "Report the battle damage." "Your Highness, a total of 8,600 people participated in this operation tonight, divided into two batches. The first batch consisted of 5,000 people, and the second batch consisted of 3,600 people. The battle radius was 65 kilometers, and the duration was 4 hours and 35 minutes. According to the current statistics, 4,100 people of the Burning Legion were sacrificed, about 600 were seriously injured, and 1,500 were lightly injured. There are still about 3,000 soldiers who can continue to fight, including some who are lightly injured. This may have some impact on their combat effectiveness." In the conference room, a mixed-race middle-aged man stood up and reported in a steady voice, "In about 5 hours, we can increase the number of combatants in Tunan City to about 9,000. The loss rate of this war is 8% lower than we expected. This is in line with expectations. This is a success." Ramelun's face was expressionless, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Even though he knew that they wouldn't be able to win easily against the Freedom Legion, such losses still made his heart ache. Even though it was in line with his expectations, it was only rational data obtained after combining a large amount of data and analysis. In his heart, the best course of action in his mind would be to reduce the loss rate by about 30%. After all, the Burning Legion who followed him into Tian'an were all elites. If they could lose less, it would mean that the Burning Legion's combat effectiveness would be stronger. Ramelun snorted and said in a deep voice, "What about the harvest?" "We are still counting." Another black man stood up. "At present, the Legion has successfully controlled 3 military bases. For the time being, we have not found any cutting-edge special weapons. However, the Freedom Corps' conventional equipment is also at least 2 grades higher than the Burning Legion's. This is the key to improving our combat effectiveness. The only pity is that they do not have fighter jets. Your Highness, perhaps we should really consider building a military airport in Tian'an." Ramelun shook his head and did not say anything, but his eyes were thoughtful. The Freedom Corps did not have fighter jets. In other words, all the major forces in Tian'an had no fighter jets. After Tian'an broke away from Annan, the airport and the railway were all destroyed. Under such circumstances, air supremacy had always been an extremely sensitive issue. Zhongzhou State could not intervene for the time being, while Annan State was full of scruples. The game between the two sides had lasted for several years, so that neither the Freedom Corps nor the rebel army had their own air power. At most, they had a few armed helicopters. "Minister Jin, how many people are left in the rebel army?" Ramelun suddenly asked after a moment of silence. Minister Jin was stunned and a little embarrassed. "We are still counting." He said this with difficulty. In fact, Annan State and the rebel army were still in the carnival of taking Tunan City. Counting the battle losses? At present, no one seemed to care about this. As for the Burning Legion, no one thought of the so-called carnival. After the battle, The first thing to do was to count the battle losses and harvest and make the next plan. Rigorous, efficient, and precise. The gap between the burning legion and the rebel army was infinitely large at this moment. Ramelin did not say much. He just looked at Minister Jean and said calmly, 30,000 people in 5 hours. Is there any problem? 5 hours. 5 hours later, the second batch of about 9,000 troops of the Burning Legion would arrive in Tunan City. At that time, Ramelin would have more than 10,000 troops under his command. In addition to the 30,000 troops of the rebel army, Ramelin could use nearly 50,000 people. This was the power he was going to use to take Ningbian in one go. Minister Jean hesitated and finally couldn't help but say, Your Highness, isn't it a little too hasty? Ramelin glanced at him and raised his eyebrows. What do you want to say? I think we need some time to prepare. Annan State will prepare a real elite force for Your Highness, equipped with the best equipment and experts in Annan State. I think only a war with full preparation can we win. Minister Jean said helplessly. Ramelin narrowed his eyes, looked at the officers sitting in the conference room, and suddenly said, What do you think? Time is not necessarily on our side. A white woman, who was rare in the Burning Legion, stood up. You know, this time we are facing Zhongzhou State, the most powerful country in the world. In terms of the quality of the army, the advanced level of armaments, and the camp of experts, we have no advantage and Annan State has no advantage. Our only advantage now is the cohesion and mobility of the Burning Legion. In other words, we are prepared for this war in advance. And Zhongzhou State, because of scruples about the influence of public opinion, is unlikely to openly send troops to occupy Tiannan. If this is not true, I think we don't have to fight the war. Because as long as Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, appears in Tiannan State, we can't even stop the Blood Battalion of Zhongzhou State. On the land, we can't even stop the Blood Battalion of Zhongzhou State. There was silence. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State. Purely in terms of personal strength, Dongqing Wudi was not too scary. But a Dongqing Wudi who led an army was enough to make anyone's scalp numb. And a legion commanded by Dongqing Wudi was also enough to make people tremble. He had been operating in the Border Control Corps for too many years. With or without him, the soldiers of the Border Control Corps were completely different in terms of momentum and mental state. If Zhongzhou State really attacked blatantly, Dongqing Wudi personally took command. The Burning Legion had no confidence to stop Dongqing Wudi at all. It's impossible. Minister Jean said immediately, Tiannan is not the territory of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State has stated that it has no territorial ambitions for Tiannan. Although we all know that it's impossible, there will certainly not be an army flying the flag of Zhongzhou State in this war. He paused, gritted his teeth, and continued, The President is communicating with the heads of state of Star State and various European countries. They will put pressure on Zhongzhou State internationally, just like in the past few years. What I can guarantee is that the army of Zhongzhou State will not enter Tiannan on a large scale. But this is the only thing I can guarantee. So time is not on our side. The white woman nodded. As long as Ningbian is still there, Zhongzhou State is equal to Tiannan and still has power. With a complete military base, it means that as long as there is time, they can secretly prepare a large number of troops and experts to enter the Freedom Corps. Then they will fight back and take down Tunan City. I think Zhongzhou State has already begun to plan this. Ningbian has the entire Zhongzhou State as its backing. The longer it takes, the more difficult the situation we face will be. So I agree with Your Highness's suggestion to take down Ningbian as soon as possible. It's not easy to take down Ningbian now. Minister Jean couldn't help saying, according to the news we got, Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Freedom Corps, has returned to Tiannan with the senior members of the Freedom Corps. Ning Ziyuan was also a famous general of Zhongzhou State before. He's not easy to deal with. What we are facing now is a Freedom Corps that has just lost a battle without a complete command. This is the time when their momentum is at its peak because they are angry and unconvinced. If we rush up at this time, we will lose a lot, and we may not win. As the Minister of Defense of Annan, He was naturally not a brainless fool. Now that he had calmed down, his mind became clearer. Also, I think you should not forget that His Highness Ramelin is not absolutely invincible. In fact, the Burning Legion has provoked a strong enemy tonight. Emperor Dong's palace may still be weak and just starting out. But now in the whole dark world, who dares to say that their palace master, Li Tianlan, is weak? He is the future heavenly sun. He has just swept Beihai province and forced the Wang family of Beihai to bow down. He is also at his peak. Many people say that although he has not entered the invincible realm, in today's dark world, he can almost be said to be invincible. I don't think I need to say more about Li Tianlan's character. We destroyed the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. With Li Tianlan's character, I don't believe he will bear it. At this time, maybe he has already reached Ningbian. If the Burning Legion rushes over, it will not only be the Freedom Corps, but also the top combat force of Emperor Dong's palace. That is also the top combat force in today's dark world. Humph! Ramelin suddenly snorted heavily, and a fierce killing intent flashed through his eyes. Seeming to realize that his mood was a little wrong, he took a deep breath, calmed himself down, and said faintly, Emperor Dong's palace is not as terrible as you say. Li Tianlan is the future heavenly sun, and the future heavenly sun also means that he is nothing now. Minister Jean looked at Ramelin's calm face, stunned. Not only him, but everyone in the whole conference room was silent for a moment. Li Tianlan was nothing now? Perhaps before the chaos in Eastern Europe broke out, some people would dare to say so. But now, even the die-hard supporters of the Burning Legion felt that Ramelin was not qualified to say such a thing. Ramelin remained calm and continued, Li Tianlan is really strong in his normal state. Although he has not entered the invincible realm, I will not underestimate him because of that. But now, he smiled and said, I have enough information to prove that Li Tianlan has suffered serious internal injuries in the trip to Beihai, and now he is not in his peak state. As for Saint, he also has internal injuries, and our people raided the hospital, which is also a top priority. Even if they want to retaliate, only one of them can come, Li Tianlan or Saint. The most important thing is, even if they come, they won't come so fast. Everyone, you all know what the future heavenly sun means. Zhongzhou State will know better than you. After the Sword Emperor is silent, Zhongzhou State will definitely strengthen the protection of Li Tianlan and support Emperor Dong's palace to establish a foothold in Tiannan. But it will take time. If there is no accident, Li Tianlan will gather the masters of Zhongzhou State as soon as possible and unite with the Freedom Corps to carry out the first counterattack against us, which is also the most dangerous counterattack. Minister Jean, believe me, it won't take too long. They will make their move in at most 3 days. Therefore, these 3 days are the most crucial time for us. I must take down Yongbian today, and then use the next 2 days to set up Yongbian. I'm talking about taking Ningbian before dark. You promised. Bang! A sturdy black man stood up, slapped the table and sneered in a low voice. As long as we take Ningbian, we will drive the forces of Zhongzhou State out of Tiannan. In this case, it will be difficult for Zhongzhou State, which has no power in Tiannan, to reach in. After all, although the Freedom Corps is now the army of Zhongzhou State, it is nominally the rebel army of Annan State. We will wipe out the rebel army, occupy the right, and drive Zhongzhou State out. What else can they do? He stared at Minister Jean and said in a rude tone, the Burning Corps is helping Annan State. What are you hesitating for? There is also the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Ramiro's voice was indifferent. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital also belongs to the Li family, and it is the force of Li Guangtu. But at present, Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan don't seem to be on the same side. But after losing Tiannan, the possibility of their temporary cooperation is not ruled out. Zhongzhou State will not be willing to give up Tiannan. If we beat back the Freedom Corps, Zhongzhou State and East Emperor Palace are likely to make a comeback with the help of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tiannan. This is all Annan's trouble. A grumpy black man said discontentedly. Minister Jean was furious and extremely embarrassed. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital was also invited by Annan at that time. At that time, the Freedom Corps was dominated by the Wang family of Beihai. The Purgatory of Heaven capital and the Wang family of Beihai were tit-for-tat. Based on the principle that the enemy was a friend, Annan invited the Purgatory of Heaven capital to enter Tiannan. But now it seemed that this was undoubtedly inviting a wolf into the house. So after dealing with the Freedom Corps, we have to select a small number of elites to destroy the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan. The only thing to be thankful for is that the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Tiannan is not much. It is probably weaker than the power of Emperor Yi's palace. This way, we can dispatch fewer elites and improve our mobility. Ramon stood up. Everyone, I know it's not easy, but this is a crucial battle for the rise of the Burning Legion. As long as we clear Zhongzhou State in heaven, as long as we clear all the forces in Tiannan, it is impossible for Zhongzhou State to extend its tentacles into Tiannan for a while under the pressure of public opinion. They will slowly develop, slowly plot, and slowly accumulate strength. This will take a lot of time. And during this time, it is the best opportunity for the Burning Corps to slowly develop. He glanced at Minister Jean and no longer had any scruples. He said straightforwardly, Annan invited us to Tiannan and invited the Burning Corps to become the special warfare center of Annan. It is not to give us power and wealth, but also to contribute. That is, to directly face the risk of Zhongzhou State in Tiannan. At this time, we will have to face their endless counterattacks in the future if we leave any way out for Zhongzhou State. So, we will have enough time to accumulate strength if we drive them out. He clenched his fists hard and said coldly, Code name Tusk. All members of the Burning Corps will be dispatched. Attack Ningbian first and destroy the Purgatory of Heaven capital in a battle area of 300 kilometers. I want to get good news before dark. The sooner, the better. Boom. The entire conference room suddenly boiled for a moment. The officers of the Burning Corps sitting in the conference room suddenly got up and began to issue orders. Ramiro turned to look at Minister Jean with a heavy look in his eyes. Annan will fully cooperate. Minister Jean took a deep breath and said directly without hesitation. I know what you are worried about. Ramiro said lightly. In the text message prompt, he took out his mobile phone and glanced at it. There were only 2 short sentences. Radel and his team have entered the hidden state. Li Tianlan didn't appear in the Freedom Corps. A smile appeared on the corner of Ramiro's mouth. Li Tianlan didn't come to Tiannan. This is the news I received. Even if he comes, I will stop him. Don't worry. Your Highness, do you think you can win against Li Tianlan? Minister Jean asked. He didn't have much confidence in what he said. Li Tianlan might not be the strongest now, but his momentum was so strong that everyone would feel a great pressure when they thought of it. This was just like Wang Tianzong, who broke through to the invincible realm. At that time, he might not be the strongest, but his momentum was soaring, sharp, and insufferably arrogant. As time went by, this impression became more and more stable, and he naturally became the top expert on the divine list. I'm not sure, Ramiro said calmly. His eyes flickered a little. Obviously, he thought of Li Tianlan's achievements. He seriously injured Gu Chenchuan, killed Jiang Chenyan, killed Black Ghost, seriously injured King Tong, killed DK, and defeated Dijiang. These were all things that Li Tianlan had done in a normal state. At his age and before entering the invincible realm, such achievements were simply brilliant. Ramiro took a deep breath and continued, but I can at least be sure that I won't lose. Li. On Lonely Mountain, with Li Tianlan's departure, everyone had dispersed. Without light, the mountain became colder than ever. The old people of the Li family had followed Li Tianlan to Tiannan. Qin Weibai and Saint also rushed back to Yuzhou. On the vast Lonely Mountain, only Li Kuangtu, Phoenix, and Daybreak were left in the base camp of the Li family. The rain in Lin and had stopped. The glimmer of dawn gradually covered the earth. At the moment when light and darkness alternated, the sound of the wheelchair passing through the cemetery became the only sound in the mountain. Phoenix and Daybreak stood at the entrance of the cemetery, motionless. Li Kuangtu was surrounded by subtle sword energy. The sword energy pushed the wheelchair down the slope of the cemetery slowly. Li Kuangtu looked at the cemetery in front of him, expressionless. After everyone left, Li Kuangtu, who did not attend the funeral and did not show up, finally entered the cemetery alone. Without Phoenix and Daybreak following him, he pushed the wheelchair alone to Li Honghe's new grave in the cemetery and stayed there for more than 2 hours. No one knew what he said to his dead father. No one even knew if he had spoken in the past 2 hours or not. Li Kuangtu's mood was very stable from beginning to end, so stable that it was almost emotionless. What time is it? Coming to daybreak, Phoenix had taken the initiative to stand behind Li Kuangtu and hold the wheelchair. Daybreak looked down at his watch and said, 5:20. Li Kuangtu thought for a while and said lightly, if there is no accident, Li Tianlan should arrive in Tiannan soon. This was not a question that Li Kuangtu should care about, but it suddenly had a different meaning when he said it at this time. Daybreak raised his eyebrows slightly and asked directly, do you want me to do something with our power? I'm not interested in Li Tianlan's revenge, but in any case, Chess Emperor can't die in vain. Li Kuangtu said lightly. One could imagine how close his first guard was to him in those days, but now he died in the Burning Legion's surprise attack. There must be an explanation for this matter. It was just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time, Li Kuangtu murmured to himself and said calmly, we can pay attention to Li Tianlan's actions in Tian. If the Burning Legion takes Ningbian, the next target must be us. This is an important bargaining chip for our cooperation with Zhongzhou State. If Li Tianlan can stop the Burning Legion, we can cooperate with him. I'll find someone to talk to him, Daybreak said. Li Kuangtu shook his head and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. You go and talk to him yourself. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital was the power left by the Li family in the old era. For many years, they had secretly joined the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in the name of faking their deaths under the benefit of Li Honghe. These people constituted the main body and the most powerful cutting-edge power of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Among these people, Li Tianlan was very familiar with most of them. Even if he was not familiar with them, he was familiar with them. If he found someone to talk to, maybe the people of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital had already become the people of Emperor Dong's palace. He had to send someone who could be absolutely trusted and could control the situation to talk to Li Tianlan, so as to avoid variables to the greatest extent. Daybreak was the most suitable candidate, but the problem was that the most suitable candidate obviously couldn't stay in Tiannan in the future. Li Kuangtu had a headache. He thought about it and continued, it's just a temporary cooperation. Remember, our most important task is not to kill the enemy, but to protect ourselves. Daybreak nodded, turned around, and left without hesitation. Li Kuangtu looked at his back and didn't speak for a long time. He finally began to face the future situation of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the problems it might face. When his identity was exposed, he was seriously injured, he was not trusted by East Island, and he didn't dare to trust Zhongzhou State. Self-protection became the most important problem for him. Li Tianlan could indeed protect the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. But it was a pity that this was not Li Kuangtu's choice. In the cold breeze of the morning, Li Kuangtu was silent for a long time, and then said lightly, contact summer solstice for me. Chapter 702. The sound of rotor rotation tore up the night wind, whistling through the boundless mountains, all the way south, flying farther and farther. The helicopter was getting closer and closer to the target site. It was still dark outside the window. The ink-like night dyed the world. At the darkest moment before dawn, only the helicopter's signal light was flashing in the air. In the somewhat crowded cabin, Li Tianlan slowly opened his eyes. The faint sound of a call rang in his ears. Attention, Freedom Corps, this is Zhongkong 2, His Highness Li Tianlan's plane. We will pass over the 4th base of the Freedom Corps in 10 minutes. I repeat, this is His Highness Li Tianlan's plane. We will pass over the 4th base of the Freedom Corps in 10 minutes. Freedom Corps, please. In the clear and calm repetition, Li Tianlan shook his head and gradually became sober. Li Tianlan moved his body. Before he spoke, Li Baitian's voice sounded, you're awake. Li Tianlan answered and asked casually, "Not asleep." "How could I fall asleep?" Li Baidian smiled bitterly. Compared with Li Tianlan's calmness, Li Baidian was completely in a state of rage. The headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace was destroyed, and the combatants suffered heavy casualties. His heart was bleeding at the thought of it. The plane flew all the way, and every second of the whole process was torture for him. The others were obviously not sleepy. Hearing Li Tianlan's words, they all opened their eyes. "We just flew over the border of Zhongzhou State. Ahead of us is Ningbian. After Ningbian, less than 70 kilometers, we will arrive at Tunan." Li Baidian said slowly, his eyes shining with blood. "Have our people gathered?" Li Tianlan asked. "About 200 people have gathered. Some are still uncontactable, and some can't get to the gathering place for the time being. If all the combat forces are gathered, it will probably take a few hours," Li Baidian said. He was talking about the strength of the headquarters of East Emperor Palace. Thousands of combat forces in the headquarters of East Emperor Palace were directly scattered by the Burning Legion. In a few hours, they left the headquarters, retreated, and gathered people. The casualties had not been counted yet. When Li Tianlan boarded the plane in Lin, he had asked Li Baidian to inform Du Hanyin and ask her to gather the scattered people as soon as possible. Du Hanyin was seriously injured, so she could only hand over the task to her assistant, which further reduced the efficiency. So far, there were less than 200 people gathered in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan nodded and looked at the crowd in the cabin. The elders of the Li family. The core of Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Yuxian. Everyone could be said to be the core of his team. It had nothing to do with Zhongzhou State or even Samsara Palace. After a moment of silence, he took out a tablet and opened the military map of Tunan City. A clear three-dimensional map showed everything around Tunan City on the screen. Li Tianlan looked at it for a while and pointed to a spot on the screen. "Probably here," he said softly. This location was about 6 kilometers away from the Freedom Legion's base number 1. It was beyond the Burning Legion's warning line and was temporarily considered a safe area. And this was where Li Tianlan had ordered the members of Emperor Dong's palace to gather. "Ninth uncle!" Li Tianlan suddenly shouted. "Young master!" In the cabin, an old man with dark skin and a face full of vicissitudes stood up. There were not many elders left in the Li family, but at this time, they all faintly regarded this old man as their leader. This was status and strength. Whether in the era of Li Honghe or in the short era of Li Guangtu, Ninth Uncle was the backbone of the Li family. His code name was Eagle King. He used to be a figure standing in the high-rise buildings of the Dark World. Among the older generation of the Li family, Eagle King could be said to be one of the strongest people in comprehensive ability. At his peak, he was also a top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Now Eagle King was nearly 60 years old and his state had begun to decline, but he still maintained the realm of the half-step invincible realm. He and Xianxia, who was seriously injured and was still recuperating in Yuzhou, could be said to be the only two experts of the half-step invincible realm who belonged to the Li family. "Bring Xianxia here and meet up with our people," Li Tianlan whispered. "Okay." Eagle King looked at the map carefully and nodded. "In this position, I probably need to go down now to meet them as soon as possible." Li Tianlan nodded. "Ninth uncle, thank you. Xianxia, you go with Ninth uncle." No matter how experienced Eagle King was, he was not familiar with the people of the East Emperor Palace. With Ning Xianxia with him, there would be no problem in commanding and dispatching. Ning Xianxia nodded and stood up. The helicopter lowered its altitude slightly. The hatch opened. In the roaring wind, Eagle King grabbed Ning Xianxia and jumped down with flashing lightning all over the sky. "Is that okay, uncle?" Li Baidian was a little hesitant. At first, he thought that Li Tianlan wanted him to lead the elites of Emperor Dong's palace. Ninth uncle was the commander of the Heavenly Eagle Troop before he went to the border with Grandpa. Li Tianlan said softly. "The Heavenly Eagle Troop?" Li Baidian was a little confused. He had never heard of such a troop in Zhongzhou State. It didn't belong to the Border Control Corps or any major theater of operations. The Heavenly Eagle Troop used to be a special troop under the dual leadership of Zhuanyuantai and the military headquarters of Zhongzhou State. Its combat field covered the whole world. The commander was directly appointed by the god of war of Zhongzhou State and had the rank of lieutenant general. After the treason case, the designation of the Heavenly Eagle Troop was cancelled. But in fact, it was reorganized. Some of the elites entered the Border Control Corps, and the remaining part changed its name, which is today's Shadow Sting Troop. Boy, why are you looking at me like that? Aren't we old guys as good as you? Yu Donglai, the oldest in the cabin, said grumpily. Li Baitian's hand shook and he smiled bitterly without saying anything. The predecessor of the Shadow Sting Troop. The Shadow Sting Force was now the largest special force in Zhongzhou State, and its predecessor, the Heavenly Eagle Force, seemed to be even stronger than the Shadow Sting Force. Although it had been many years since he was the commander of the Heavenly Eagle Force, he shouldn't be questioned. He glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was still calm. But it was not until this moment that Li Baitian really realized something. Even though the Li family had fallen, it didn't dissipate after all. Eagle King was just a microcosm of the Li family in the past. This made Li Baitian see more clearly what the Li family was. The Li family had indeed fallen because of the treason case. But this kind of fall wasn't a dying struggle, but a choice and compromise. Not only Li Baitian, but many people who hadn't experienced everything back then would feel very strange. The treason case led to the total annihilation of the army deployed by Zhongzhou State on the border, which was indeed very serious. But at that time, the patriarch of the Li family was not Li Guangtu, but Li Honghe. What was Li Honghe's status in Zhongzhou State? Not to mention that year, even if he had disappeared from the stage of Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years, his death still caused an unprecedented shock in Zhongzhou State. All the directors and members of the Zhongzhou State Parliament were present, including the military and the special warfare system. And Li Honghe, who was still at his peak, had an even more terrifying influence. In other words, as long as he was willing to give up something, the Li family might still survive in the Li family. Maybe Kunlun City would replace Zhuanyuantai. But at that time, the Li family would still be one of the wealthy families in Zhongzhou State. But Li Honghe didn't do that. He didn't give up something. He gave up everything. Yes, he even took away all the people who were loyal to the Li family. He gave up the so-called power and wealth, but he took away the most powerful and core force of the Li family and didn't let them disperse. If Li Honghe had chosen to persist, then the people and forces he had taken away would have been destined to be the objects he had abandoned. What he could have kept was his greatly reduced status, power, and wealth, but he would have lost the people's support. So Li Honghe gave up what he should give up, kept what he couldn't give up, and went to the remote border. For more than 20 years, the cohesion of the Li family had not dispersed, but became the purgatory of Heaven capital. Until today. With the death of Li Honghe and the exposure of Li Guangtu's identity, Zhongzhou State and Li Guangtu had a bridge of cooperation again. Zhongzhou State already had a neutral attitude to investigate the treason case. In this way, Li Guangtu was no longer a traitor, but a suspect. As for the old members of the Li family, they were no longer accomplices and implicated. They might not be so innocent, but at least, with the death of Li Honghe and the rise of Li Tianlan, they were no longer the focus of surveillance. The power that the Li family had suppressed for more than 20 years could finally reappear in Zhongzhou State. For example, the current Eagle King. This was just the beginning. Li Baitian thought of the purgatory of Heaven capital. The purgatory of Heaven capital was destined to have Li Guangtu's loyal followers, but there were also many people who faked their deaths to avoid the surveillance of Zhongzhou State and still contributed to the Li family. Before Li Honghe died, he handed the Li family to Li Tianlan. These people naturally recognized Li Tianlan more than Li Guangtu. What did this mean? It meant that as the situation gradually became clear, a considerable part of the purgatory of Heaven capital would gradually join Emperor Dong's palace. They were all experts of the last era and people who once occupied special positions in Zhongzhou State. That was the main structure of the Li family. With the development of Emperor Dong's palace, this huge structure would also radiate new vitality inside Emperor Dong's palace. For the first time, Li Baitian felt awe. power, status, wealth, and strength. Most of the time, it was an inseparable whole. But in a huge accident, when the Li family had to make a choice, Li Honghe did not hesitate to choose to preserve his strength. He gave up all the power, status, and wealth, and took great risks to lie dormant. He made great achievements and finally received the report. He broke the cocoon and turned into a butterfly. At this moment, the Li family, after years of Li Honghe's forbearance, stood up again in Li Tianlan's hands. It was like a nirvana, rebirth from the fire. And all this came from Li Honghe's sobriety and reason in those years. Li Beidian took a deep breath and looked in the direction of Tunan City, with flames burning in his eyes. He could totally see how glorious Emperor Dong's palace would be after this matter was solved. They would welcome an impact that was extremely beneficial to them. The old people of the Li family and even the purgatory of heaven capital entering Emperor Dong's palace would impact the current situation of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Beidian was very clear that as the person who first followed Li Tianlan, he had to use his sword to find his position in Emperor Dong's palace in the future. Beidian. Li Tianlan's voice pulled Li Beidian's thoughts back. Li Beidian responded. You, Senior Yu Qingyan. Li Tianlan hesitated and looked at the remaining old people of the Li family. Let's go. Two of them stood up, a man and a woman. They were the few couples among the old people of the Li family. Their strength was not strong, and their talent was not outstanding. The man barely entered the thunder-shocking realm, and the woman was still at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. But there were not many masters in the Burning Legion except for Ramelin. Li Tianlan nodded and said, You go to the number 2 base. He glanced at Lin Yuxian and said slowly, You go with Beidian. Apart from friendship, Li Beidian was the only one in the core team of Emperor Dong's palace who was very likely to break through and enter the invincible realm. Ning Qianxing was also very good, but if there was no accident, it was difficult for him to cross the chasm from the peak of the thunder-shocking realm to the invincible realm. Yu Qingyan and Du Hanin were the same. In the future, they were not mainly responsible for fighting in Emperor Dong's palace. In terms of fighting, Li Beidian was most likely to become Li Tianlan's right-hand man. Mount Shu's Great Void Sword could be regarded as a standard late stage in martial arts. Now Li Beidian was in the thunder-shocking realm. Although he was good, he did not seem to be absolutely strong. Once he entered the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, his combat capability would usher in a real outbreak, and the higher he went, the stronger he would be. Among the 4 famous swords of Mount Shu, the sword intent of Great Void Sword was even above that of Nirvana Sword. Lin Yuxian was destined not to work for Li Tianlan in the future, but Li Tianlan hoped that Lin Yuxian could establish a good relationship with Li Beidian during his time in Emperor Dong's palace. Okay. Lin Yuxian did not hesitate and nodded with a smile. Li Tianlan's eyes finally fell on several elders of the Li family. 8 people. 1 at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, 3 at the thunder-shocking realm, and 4 at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and said softly, You go to the 3rd base. The 3 military bases in Tunan City were arranged in a triangle, and the first base had the best geographical location. After being occupied by the Burning Legion, as long as the Burning Legion still had ambition, they would definitely place a large number of soldiers in the first base. Therefore, Li Tianlan also invested the most people in the first base. Eagle King, Ning Qianxing, Emperor Dong's palace, and the combined forces were all sent there. The second base was located on the side of Tunan City, and the surrounding environment was dangerous. This position was not good for attack, but it was the best position for defense. According to the intelligence of the Freedom Corps, the second base had the most heavy firepower and relatively few combatants. Lin Yuxian, Li Beidian, and Yu Donglai could be said to be the strongest destructive force available to Li Tianlan now. It was most suitable for them to go to the second base. The definition of the third base was logistics, and its strength was relatively weak. It should not be a problem for the 8 elders of the Li family to attack the third base. Of course, this was the arrangement of the Freedom Corps in the 3 bases, not the Burning Legion. But the Burning Legion had just taken Tunan City, and it was impossible for them to make too much change. Remember, Your main purpose is to contain them. It's best if you can take down the 3 bases. If you can't, don't force them. Just contain them in the bases. Li Tianlan said quietly, as long as the 3 bases can't be free, my pressure will be much less. Lin Yuxian nodded and suddenly felt something wrong. He glanced at the people in the cabin again and suddenly said, "Who will go to Tunan City with you?" "Sure enough," Li Tianlan said calmly, "I'll go by myself." "Are you crazy?" Lin Yuxian and Li Baidian shouted at the same time. The main force of Tunan City was the 3 defense bases, but it did not mean that Tunan City had no defense force, especially when the Burning Legion entered Tunan City. Many important figures of the Burning Legion, powerful elites, and even Ramelun were in Tunan City. Under such circumstances, the defense force of Tunan City was much stronger than that of any base. Not to mention those elite soldiers and senior officers, Li Tianlan could not even get through Ramelun. "Since I dare to go, I'm not courting death." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "What other bargaining chips do you have? You're alone." Li Baidian's tone was a little excited. "I'm really alone." Li Tianlan nodded and said, "But I have a sword." His fingers moved slightly. The black and exquisite Xianyuan sword appeared in his hand and slowly rotated around his palm. "I'll take it." Li Tianlan said softly, "That's enough." He looked at Lin Yuxian and said blandly, "As long as you can contain the forces of the 3 bases, Ramelun is no match for us. 1 man, 1 sword." Lin Yuxian hesitated. "There's no time." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Let's go." Li Baidian suddenly gritted his teeth. Everyone got up at the same time and jumped out of the cabin. The cabin suddenly became spacious and empty. Li Tianlan sat quietly by himself. The outline of Tunan City gradually appeared in front of him. The night was still dark. A communication request suddenly lit up. Li Tianlan connected the video call. The figure of Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Freedom Corps, appeared in front of Li Tianlan. "Your Highness, have you arrived in Tianan?" Ning Ziyuan asked directly. "Yes, Uncle Ning, how are things going on your side?" Li Tianlan's voice was very polite. He was not only Ning Qianxing's father but also one of the backbone forces of the Li family today. Otherwise, he would not have been directly transferred from the Eastern Theater of Operations to Tianan. To some extent, it was equivalent to being exiled in disguise. "Not very good, but I can still spare some men. I'm communicating with Wudi. Oh, and Thunder God." Ning Ziyuan said quickly, "The Blood Battalion will provide some elites, plus a part of the Thunderbolt Battalion of the Freedom Corps. Your Highness, we don't have to rush to counterattack. The Freedom Corps will act with you." "No need." Li Tianlan chuckled softly, "This is a war that belongs to Emperor Dong's palace." He paused and continued, "I insist." Ning Ziyuan looked at him in astonishment and asked incomprehensibly, "Why?" "Because the Freedom Corps is the Freedom Corps, and Emperor Dong's palace is Emperor Dong's palace." Li Tianlan said seriously, "Uncle Ning, we are on the same side. But the Freedom Corps and Emperor Dong's palace can only be regarded as allies." "You mean?" Ning Ziyuan was thoughtful. "Judging from the development trend of Tianan, Uncle Ning, what position do you think the Freedom Corps will play in Tianan in the future?" "In the future? There will be no Freedom Corps in the future." Ning Ziyuan smiled bitterly. Li Tianlan did not speak. Ning Ziyuan was right. There would be no Freedom Corps in Tianan in the future, and there would be no place for them in Tianan at all. The reason? The reason was very simple. Because they were still nominally the rebel army of Annan, which was unjustifiable. Moreover, Annan could not let the Freedom Corps continue to exist. This was the truth that the whole Zhongzhou state understood. Therefore, when Li Tianlan chose to put Emperor Dong's palace in Tianan, Zhongzhou state quickly accepted it. Annan state would not accept an army of Zhongzhou state dominating Tianan in the name of its own country's rebel army. They would destroy the Freedom Corps at all costs. But as time went by, because of the Freedom Corps, Tianan no longer belonged to Annan. This was also a fact. Emperor Dong's palace was now the link between Zhongzhou state and the Freedom Corps. In this respect, it was equivalent to Zhongzhou state supporting Emperor Dong's palace, and Emperor Dong's palace supporting the Freedom Corps. In this way, Zhongzhou State and the Freedom Corps had no inevitable connection. The plan with strength as the foundation was always simple but powerless. Next, Emperor Dong's palace would support the Freedom Corps to completely occupy Tiannan. Then, Emperor Dong's palace would conquer the Freedom Corps. In this way, the Freedom Corps was gone, but the land was naturally occupied by Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace took Tiannan as its spoils of war and helped Annan State eliminate some rebels. As for Tiannan that had been occupied, Annan State wanted to take it back? What the hell were you thinking? This was the territory that Emperor Dong's palace took from the rebels. Why should it be returned to you? If you were not convinced, Annan State could turn to the Freedom Corps. But the Freedom Corps no longer existed. At that time, Annan State was bound to negotiate with Emperor Dong's palace. But Emperor Dong's palace, backed by Zhongzhou State, could talk nonsense with Annan State about this matter. When this matter was delayed for a long time, Emperor Dong's palace could declare Tiannan independent or turn to Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State could only accept it. At that time, even if Annan State wanted to find fault, it could not find Zhongzhou State. They could only find Li Tianlan, and Li Tianlan would ask them to find the Freedom Corps. Find it at will. If things were delayed for a long time, Tiannan was destined to become a part of Zhongzhou State. Yes. Li Tianlan said softly, there will be no Freedom Corps in the future. Uncle, we are on the same side. I have something to say. I insist that Emperor Dong's palace fight this time with its own strength because I want to receive something in advance. Ning Ziyuan suddenly understood what Li Tianlan meant. He was stunned for a while before he suddenly said, "Good boy, I understand. You are eyeing the armaments of the Freedom Corps?" At this moment, he did not even call Li Tianlan Your Highness. To be exact, the armaments of the Burning Corps. Tunnan City had fallen. The 3 military bases were occupied by the Burning Corps. All the weapons and equipment there naturally belonged to the Burning Corps. If Emperor Dong's palace joined hands with the Freedom Corps, in the eyes of Zhongzhou State, it was equal to recovering the lost land. But if Emperor Dong's palace took the initiative to attack, then everything they conquered was equal to the spoils of Emperor Dong's palace. The Freedom Corps had nearly 50,000 people, and the 3 military bases in Tunnan City could accommodate nearly 20,000 people. That was a batch of military equipment that could instantly arm a reinforced division. And they were all top-notch goods. As long as Emperor Dong's palace took this batch of armaments, their new city plan could be restarted. And at this stage, their re-established headquarters would also become impregnable because of this batch of armaments. Military equipment that was enough to arm 20,000 people. If Emperor Dong's palace wanted to apply to Zhongzhou State for such large-scale materials, it would be wishful thinking. The academics was bound to be in a difficult position, and the Prince Group, Special Warfare Group, and Southeast Group would all oppose it. Zhongzhou State funded the Freedom Corps to conquer Tiannan. This was the overall situation, and no one opposed it. After all, there were still many variables in the future of Emperor Dong's palace. But supporting Emperor Dong's palace would make Li Tianlan's power soar, and there would be more people who opposed it. Now, Emperor Dong's palace took the spoils of war by itself. Did the Prince Group and Special Warfare Group want to take them back? That was even more wishful thinking. At least the Giant Group and the academics would not agree. This was the reason why Li Tianlan insisted that Emperor Dong's palace take the initiative to attack. He did not need any allies in this battle. This batch of armaments that could arm 20,000 people would become the spoils of Emperor Dong's palace. This would also be the battle where Emperor Dong's palace officially established itself in Tiannan and even completely established its position. With this batch of armaments, I can do a lot of things. Li Tianlan suddenly said, "There is no official military airport in Tiannan?" Ning Ziyuan was stunned, and then he nodded and said, "Yes. There will be one soon." Li Tianlan said calmly, "After this battle, there will be one." Ning Ziyuan was shocked. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.